The Arizona sun burned like judgment itself as Amelia Prescott stood on that auction block, wristbound dress torn and stained with blood that wasn't all her own. Men shouted numbers like she was livestock, their eyes hungry with something worse than greed. She'd left Boston as a schoolteacher bound for California. Now she was merchandise in a town where law died at the border. Then a cowboy's voice cut through the chaos. $100. And everything changed. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far Amelia's journey travels across this world. The stagecoach attack had happened 3 days ago, though. To Amelia Prescott, it felt like 3 lifetimes. She remembered the precise moment everything shattered, the way her book had slipped from her fingers as the first gunshot cracked across the desert. Silence. How Mrs. Henley had screamed before the second shot silenced her forever. The metallic taste of fear flooding Amelia's mouth as masked riders surrounded their coach like wolves circling wounded prey. She remembered the driver's body hitting the sand with a sound no human should make, remembered the rough hands dragging her from the wreckage while her carefully packed trunk spilled its contents across the blood-soaked ground. Her teaching certificates, her mother's cameo, the letter of introduction to the San Francisco Ladies Academy, all of it left behind in the dust. Now she stood on a wooden platform in the center of Promise Creek, Arizona territory, with the noon sun hammering down on her bare head and the jeers of strange men rising around her like smoke from hell itself. Her wrists were bound with rope that had rubbed the skin raw. Her green traveling dress was torn at the shoulder and stained dark with dried blood. Some of it from the cut above her eye, some from the driver whose body she'd been thrown across during the endless ride to this place. What am I bid for this fine piece of Eastern quality? The auctioneer was a barrel-chested man with tobacco-stained teeth and eyes that never quite met hers. Young educated, comes from good breeding by the look of her. Speak English real pretty, I'm told. Start the bidding at $20. 25. The shout came from a rancher in dust-covered denims, his face burned red by years under the merciless sun. 30 val. Another voice, this one belonging to a man whose expensive suit couldn't quite hide the cruelty in his narrow features. Amelia's legs trembled beneath her, but she forced herself to stand straight. 3 days ago, she had been Miss Amelia Prescott of Beacon Hill, daughter of Jonathan Prescott, graduate of the Hartford Female Seminary, a woman with prospects and purpose. Now she was this, a thing to be sold, her value measured in dollars and the hunger in men's eyes. The town of Promise Creek sprawled around the auction square like a wound that refused to heal. Wooden buildings leaned against each other in weary solidarity, their paint long since surrendered to wind and sand. A saloon stood directly across from the platform, its doors swinging open to release the sounds of drinking and gambling even at this hour. To her left, a general store advertised supplies in faded letters. To her right, the sheriff's office sat dark and apparently empty, if this town even had a sheriff worth the name. $40. The bid came from a freighter whose hands were the size of dinner plates. 45. The suit-wearing man, again his smile showing too many teeth. Amelia's mind raced through impossible calculations. The outlaws who had taken her, the ones who had killed the driver, and Mrs. Henley and the elderly couple from Philadelphia had spoken of her as valuable merchandise. At first she hadn't understood. Then, as they'd ridden through the night toward this god-forsaken town, one of them had explained it with casual cruelty. Eastern women fetched good prices in places where decent females were scarce. They could be sold as wives' servants, or worse, depending on the buyer. I am an American citizen, she had protested, her voice still strong despite the tear. My father is a prominent merchant in Boston. You cannot simply sell a person. This is 1875, not the Dark Ages. The outlaw had laughed, his breath reeking of whiskey. Out here, miss, you're whatever we say you are, and you say whatever we tell you to say. That's how it works in Promise Creek. Now standing on this block with the sun turning her world white and the voices rising in a cacophony of bids, Amelia understood exactly how far she was from Boston, from law, from civilization itself. $50? Someone knew a miner by the look of his clothes, dust still clinging to his beard. The auctioneer grinned, sensing momentum. Now we're talking, gentlemen. This ain't some worn-out dove from the saloon. This here's quality. Look at them hands, never done a day's hard labor. Look at that face, even with the bruises. pretty as a painting once you clean her up. And educated. She can read, write, probably do your accounts. What am I bid? 60. The rancher again, his face flushed with something Amelia didn't want to name. 70. The suit man leaning forward, now his interest clearly piqued. Amelia's vision swam. The heat was oppressive, pressing down on her skull like an iron weight. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, a stale biscuit one of her captors had tossed to her like she was a dog. She hadn't slept, not really just collapsed into unconsciousness between long stretches of riding. Her body ached in places she'd never known could ache, and the cut above her eye throbbed with each heartbeat. But worse than the physical pain was the crushing weight of helplessness. All her life she had been taught that civilization was a shield, that law and order protected decent people from chaos. Her father had built his fortune on that principle: honest dealing fair, contracts the rule of law. She had believed it absolutely. The Arizona Territory had shattered that belief like glass. 75, a new voice, rough and eager. 80, the miner not to be outdone. The bids were climbing faster now, and with each increase, Amelia felt herself slipping further from anything resembling rescue or hope. These men weren't bidding on a person. They were bidding on property, on an investment, on something to use and discard when it no longer served their purposes. Her eyes swept across the crowd, searching desperately for something she didn't even know what. A friendly face. A woman who might intervene. Some sign that not everyone in this cursed town had surrendered their humanity. Instead, she saw only faces hardened by the brutal life of the frontier. Men who had come west to escape something or find something. Men who had learned that survival meant taking what you could get and holding on to it with both fists. A few women watched from the boardwalk, but their expressions were carefully neutral, as if they'd learned long ago not to interfere in men's business. 85, the suit man's voice carried a note of determination now. 90, the rancher, his jaw set. The auctioneer's grin widened. $90. Do I hear 95? This is quality goods, gentlemen. Finest kind. You won't see another like her come through Promise Creek for a good long $100. The voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk, quiet, firm, carrying an authority that had nothing to do with volume. The effect was immediate and startling. The shouting stopped. The auctioneer's mouth hung open mid-sentence. Every head turned toward the source of that unexpected bid. Amelia turned too, her vision still swimming with heat and exhaustion and despair, and saw him for the first time. He stood at the edge of the crowd, a tall figure in dusty ranch clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. Unlike the others pressing close to the platform, he had maintained a distance as if the whole spectacle offended some deeply held principle. But there was nothing hesitant about his posture. He stood with the easy confidence of a man who knew exactly what he was and what he was worth. $100, the auctioneer found his voice, though uncertainty had crept into it. That's a mighty fine bid, stranger. Mighty fine. But these other gentlemen might want to— $100, the cowboy repeated, and this time he took a step forward into the sunlight. Cash money. Right now. Unless you got some reason to refuse legal tender. Amelia could see him more clearly now. He was perhaps 30 years old, with sun-darkened skin and brown hair that curled slightly at his collar. His face was lean and weathered, marked by what looked like a scar along his left jaw. But his eyes, even from this distance, she could see them, were startlingly clear. A light brown that seemed to see straight through the ugliness of the moment, to something else, something she couldn't quite name. The suit man bristled. Now hold on just a minute. I was prepared to go higher. Then you should have bid higher. The cowboy's tone was mild, but something in it made the suit man's protest die in his throat. Auction works by taking the high bid at the moment it's made. That's how it's done. Unless— and here, his gaze swept across the crowd with a sharpness that made several men shift uncomfortably. Unless this whole thing ain't a proper auction at all. Unless it's something else entirely. Something that might interest the territorial marshal next time he rides through. The silence that followed was electric with tension. The auctioneer licked his lips, his eyes darting between the cowboy and several men in the crowd. The outlaws who had brought her here, Amelia realized with a jolt of recognition. They were scattered among the townspeople, watching this development with expressions that promised violence. "This is a legal sale," the auctioneer said, but his voice had lost its earlier bravado. "All proper-like. Got the papers and everything."
This
"Then
story
you'll
was
take my
posted on the
$100,
channel
the
west
cowboy
of
said
Betrayal.
flatly.
Please
"And
do
we'll
not
be done
repost
here."
it in any form.
For a moment, Amelia thought the outlaws might object, might start shooting, might turn this dusty square into a killing ground. She could see it in their postures, the way hands drifted toward gun belts, the way eyes narrowed with calculation and rage. But then one of them, the leader, the one who had explained her fate with such casual cruelty, gave a slight nod. Perhaps he recognized that challenging this stranger would draw exactly the kind of attention they couldn't afford. Perhaps he simply calculated that $100 was good enough profit for a few days' work. Whatever his reasoning, his nod was permission, and the others relaxed incrementally. The auctioneer nearly sagged with relief. "Sold," he declared quickly, before anyone could change their minds. "Sold to the gentleman for $100. Come on up and collect your purchase." The word hung in the air like a curse. The cowboy stepped forward, pulling a leather wallet from his vest and counting out bills with steady hands. He didn't look at Amelia yet, keeping his attention on the transaction on the auctioneer's hands as the money changed possession on the crowd that was slowly, reluctantly beginning to disperse. "Need something in writing," the cowboy said. "Bill of sale. Proper documentation." The auctioneer hesitated, then shrugged and produced a piece of paper from his vest, scribbling on it with a stub of pencil. "Says here, one female, age approximately 22, sold for $100 to..." He looked up. "Name, Owen Zachariah. To Owen Zachariah this 7th day of August 1875. He signed with a flourish and thrust the paper at Owen. "There. All legal." Owen took the paper, folded it carefully, and tucked it into his vest. Then and only then did he turn his full attention to Amelia. His eyes met hers, and in that moment she saw something that made her breath catch. Not hunger, not cruelty, not the cold assessment she'd been subjected to all morning. What she saw was something closer to sorrow, mixed with a fierce determination that seemed to burn behind his measured calm. He mounted the platform with 3 long strides and stopped in front of her. Up close she could see the details the distance had hidden, the fine lines at the corners of his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the careful way he held himself as if always prepared for violence but never eager for it. "Ma'am," he said quietly, and his voice held a gentleness that seemed impossible in this place at this moment. "I know you're frightened. I know this is about the worst situation a person can find themselves in. But I need you to trust me for just a few minutes. Can you do that?" Amelia's throat was too dry for speech, but she managed a tiny nod. Owen reached behind her, and she felt his fingers working at the ropes binding her wrists. The sensation was strange, careful, deliberate, not the rough handling she'd endured for 3 days. When the ropes fell away, her hands flew automatically to rub her raw wrists, and she saw him wince slightly at the sight of the damage. "Got a horse waiting," he said, pitching his voice for her ears alone. "We're going to walk off this platform together nice and calm. Don't run, don't stumble. Don't give these men any excuse to think twice about this transaction. You understand?" "Yes," she whispered, finding her voice at last. It came out cracked and raw, but it was hers. "Good." He offered his arm as if they were strolling into a Boston parlor instead of stepping off an auction block in a lawless Arizona town. "Then let's go home." She took his arm because she had no other choice, because her legs were shaking so badly she wasn't sure they'd support her weight, because this stranger had just done something no one else in this crowd had even considered doing. As they descended from the platform, Owen turned back to address the crowd one final time. His voice rang out clear and hard across the square, carrying a note of absolute authority. "Just so we're clear. Gentlemen, she's mine." A ripple went through the watching men, a mixture of disappointment and resignation. Owen continued, his tone sharpening, "Mine to protect." The addition of those 2 words changed everything. Amelia felt it in the way the crowd's energy shifted, in the way even the outlaws seemed to reassess the situation. This wasn't just a man claiming property. This was a man drawing a line in the sand, declaring protection over something he'd just bought free. The implication was crystal clear. Anyone who wanted to challenge his claim would have to go through him. Owen's horse was a sturdy bay gelding tied to a hitching post at the edge of the square. He helped Amelia mount first, then swung up behind her with the easy grace of someone who'd spent his whole life in a saddle. His arm came around her waist, steadying, not confining, and she felt the solid warmth of his chest at her back. "Hold on," he murmured, and urged the horse into a walk. They moved through Promise Creek at an unhurried pace, Owen nodding to a few townspeople who watched their passage with open curiosity. Amelia kept her eyes forward, her spine rigid despite her exhaustion. She would not crumble, not yet, not where these people could see. Only when the last buildings of Promise Creek had fallen behind them, when they were surrounded by nothing but open desert and the endless blue sky, did Amelia allow herself to acknowledge the trembling that had started deep in her core. "You can let it out," Owen said quietly behind her. "Ain't nobody here but us, and God and I figure he understands." The permission was all she needed. The sob that had been building in her chest for 3 days finally broke free, followed by another and another, until she was crying with a violence that shook her entire frame. Owen simply held the reins steady and let his arm support her weight as she fell apart. She cried for Mrs. Henley, who had been so excited about visiting her daughter in California. She cried for the elderly couple whose names she'd never learned who had died trying to protect her. She cried for the life she'd lost somewhere in the desert between the stagecoach and the auction block. And she cried for herself for the terror and helplessness and degradation of being sold like cattle in a town square. When the storm finally passed, leaving her drained and hollow, Owen spoke again. "There's water in my canteen. Left side saddlebag. You should drink." With shaking hands, Amelia retrieved the canteen and drank deeply. The water was warm but clean, and it washed away some of the dust coating her throat. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for yet," Owen replied. "We got about an hour's ride to my ranch. You think you can hold on that long?" "I can hold on," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. After everything she'd endured, 1 more hour seemed almost easy. They rode in silence for a while, the desert stretching out around them in shades of tan and gold and rust. In Boston, Amelia had imagined the West as a romantic landscape from dime novels, dramatic mesas, and noble savages and heroic cowboys. The reality was harsher and stranger. Beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with survival. "I have questions," she said finally, as much to break the silence as anything. "Figured you might. Why did you do it? Buy me, I mean." The words felt strange in her mouth. "You don't know me. You don't know anything about me." Owen was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested old pain, old memories. "Known a few women who ended up in bad situations on the frontier. Most of them didn't have anyone willing to step in. Figured if I could do something about it this time, I should." "But $100 is money," Owen finished. "I got a ranch that makes enough to live on. Got no family depending on me, no debts hanging over my head. Seemed like a fair trade, some of my money for your freedom." Amelia turned her head slightly, trying to see his face. "And now, what happens now?" "Now we get you somewhere safe, get you cleaned up, fed, rested. Then we figure out where you were heading and how to get you there." He paused. "Unless you'd rather I take you straight to Fort Yuma. Got a territorial marshal there who could help." "No," Amelia said quickly. The thought of more strangers, more questions, more of the helpless feeling that had consumed her for 3 days was too much. "No, Your ranch is fine. For now." "All right then." Owen shifted slightly in the saddle. "Fair warning, though, I got someone living on the ranch with me. Woman named Maggie Thornton. She's a widow, runs her own small spread nearby, but helps me out with certain things. She's got a sharp tongue, but a good heart. She'll likely take one look at you and start fussing something fierce." Despite everything, Amelia felt a ghost of a smile touch her lips. "A woman sounds wonderful right now." Figured it might. They lapsed into silence again, but it was more comfortable now, less fraught with the desperate questions that had been consuming Amelia since Owen had stepped out of that crowd. She watched the landscape roll past, noted the way the shadows were beginning to lengthen as afternoon wore toward evening, and tried not to think too hard about what came next. 1 hour at a time, she told herself. 1 moment at a time. The ranch, when it finally appeared on the horizon, was smaller than Amelia had imagined, but sturdier. A single-story house built of adobe and wood,
This story was
a barn
posted
that
on the
showed
channel
signs of
west
recent
of the
repair,
trail.
a corral
Please
where
do not
several horses
repost it
lifted their
in any
heads to
form.
watch their approach. It was modest, but it was clearly maintained with care, and after 3 days of chaos and violence, the care felt like a promise of something better. As they rode into the yard, the front door of the house opened, and a woman emerged. She was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, and eyes that missed nothing. She wore a practical dress covered by an apron, and her expression shifted from curiosity to concern as she took in the scene before her. "Owen Zachariah?" She called out, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. "What in the name of all that's holy have you brought home now?" "Company Maggie," Owen replied, reining in the horse. "Lady needs help." Maggie's sharp eyes traveled over Amelia, cataloging the torn dress, the bruises, the raw wrists, the dried blood. Her expression hardened in a way that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with fierce protectiveness. "Get her inside," Maggie ordered, already turning back toward the house. "I'll heat water and fetch the medical kit. Lord have mercy, Owen, what happened to her?" "Long story," Owen said, dismounting and then helping Amelia down with careful hands. "Let's get her settled first, then I'll explain." Amelia's legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground. 3 days of rough riding, followed by the shock and stress of the auction, had taken their toll. Owen steadied her with a hand at her elbow, his touch light but firm. "Easy now, just a few more steps." Somehow she made it to the house. Maggie held the door open, still clucking with concern, and ushered them into a front room that was simply furnished but clean and welcoming. A worn sofa sat against one wall, a rough-hewn table and chairs occupied the center, and a stone fireplace dominated the far wall. It wasn't fancy, but after 3 days of dust and fear and pain, it looked like paradise. "Sit her down here," Maggie commanded, indicating the sofa. "Owen, go fetch that water. And some soap, the good kind, not that harsh stuff you use. And clean cloths. Move, man." Owen moved, disappearing through a doorway that presumably led to the kitchen. Maggie knelt in front of Amelia, her hands surprisingly gentle as she examined the cut above Amelia's eye. "Who did this to you, child?" "Outlaws," Amelia whispered. "They attacked our stagecoach, killed the others, sold me in Promise Creek." Maggie's mouth compressed into a thin line. "And Owen bought you?" "Yes." "Well," Maggie sat back on her heels, her expression complex. "That's the most foolish, noble thing I've heard of in a month of Sundays, which makes it exactly the kind of thing Owen Zachariah would do." She reached out and patted Amelia's knee. "You're safe now, understand, safe as houses. Nobody's going to hurt you here." The simple declaration, spoken with such absolute certainty, finally broke through the last of Amelia's defenses. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were tears of relief rather than despair. "Thank you," she managed. "Thank you. I don't even know how to—" "Hush now." Maggie produced a handkerchief from her apron pocket. "No need for speeches. What's your name, child?" "Amelia. Amelia Prescott. From Boston." "Long way from home, Amelia Prescott, from Boston." Maggie's tone gentled further. "But you're not alone anymore. Now, let's get you cleaned up and fed, and then you can sleep for about a week if you want to. Everything else can wait." Owen returned with a basin of warm water, clean cloths, and a bar of soap that smelled faintly of lavender. He set them down on the table and then stepped back as if recognizing that this was now Maggie's domain. "I'll tend to the horse," he said. "And then I need to ride into town, send a telegram to the territorial marshal at Fort Yuma. Let him know what happened." Amelia looked up sharply. "Will that be safe? Those outlaws—" "They got what they wanted," Owen said, his tone flat. "You were merchandise and they sold you. They got no reason to come after me and every reason to clear out before someone starts asking questions about how they came by you in the first place. Still," Amelia pressed, "be careful, please." Something flickered in Owen's eyes, surprise perhaps that she was concerned for him. "I will," he promised. "Maggie, you need anything from town?" "More of that wound salve from the doctor. And coffee. We're nearly out." Maggie was already wringing out a cloth in the warm water. "Take your time. We'll be fine here." Owen nodded and headed back out, leaving Amelia alone with Maggie and the overwhelming relief of safety. As Maggie gently cleaned the dried blood from her face, Amelia closed her eyes and tried to process everything that had happened. This morning she had been property sold to the highest bidder in a lawless town. Now she was sitting in a ranch house being tended by a kind woman under the protection of a man who had paid for her freedom without asking anything in return. It didn't make sense. Nothing about the last 3 days made sense. But as the warm cloth moved across her skin, washing away the physical evidence of her ordeal, Amelia decided that understanding could wait. For now, for this moment, she was simply grateful to be alive. And more than that, she was grateful to have found two people who still believed in doing the right thing, even in a place as harsh and unforgiving as the Arizona Territory. It was, she thought, as exhaustion finally began to claim her more than she had any right to hope for. But it was enough. For now, it was enough. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time Amelia opened her eyes again, painting the unfamiliar room in shades of deep purple and shadow. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. The bed beneath her was too soft, the air too still, the silence too complete. Then memory crashed back like a wave, and she sat up with a gasp that caught in her throat. "Easy now," Maggie's voice came from somewhere to her left, calm and reassuring. "You're still at the Zachariah Ranch, still safe. You've been sleeping for about 3 hours." Amelia turned to find the older woman sitting in a rocking chair near the window, mending what looked like a work shirt by the light of an oil lamp. The warm glow softened the harsh lines of Maggie's face, revealing a gentleness that her no-nonsense demeanor usually concealed. 3 hours. Amelia's voice was rough with sleep. She looked down at herself and realized she was wearing a clean nightgown, soft cotton, that smelled of soap and sunshine. Her torn dress was nowhere to be seen. "I don't remember—" "You fell asleep while I was tending your wounds," Maggie said, setting aside her mending. "Exhaustion finally caught up with you, which is exactly what your body needed. I got you cleaned up and into something comfortable. Hope you don't mind that I took some liberties, but you couldn't very well sleep in that ruined dress." Amelia felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm grateful. I'm not used to being so helpless." "Helpless and exhausted aren't the same thing, child." Maggie stood and moved to the small table beside the bed where a pitcher of water and a glass waited. She poured and handed it to Amelia. "You survived an attack that killed 4 other people. You survived 3 days with outlaws and being sold like cattle in Promise Creek. That's not helpless, that's strong as iron. Your body just needed rest." Amelia drank deeply, the cool water soothing her parched throat. As her mind cleared, questions began to surface. "Owen? Mr. Zachariah, did he return from town?" "About an hour ago." Maggie settled back into her rocking chair. "Sent his telegram to the marshal, picked up some supplies. He's out in the barn now, finishing up evening chores. He'll want to talk with you once you're feeling up to it." "I'm up to it now." Amelia pushed back the light blanket covering her legs. "I've imposed enough already without—" "You've imposed nothing," Maggie interrupted firmly. "And you'll stay right there until you've had something to eat. I made stew, nothing fancy, just beef and vegetables, but it's hot, and it'll put some strength back in you. I'll bring you a bowl." Before Amelia could protest, Maggie had disappeared through the doorway. Left alone, Amelia took stock of her surroundings more carefully. The room was small but well kept, with whitewashed adobe walls and a single window that looked out toward the barn. A simple dresser stood against one wall, topped with a wash basin and mirror. The bed frame was handmade but sturdy, the quilt covering it stitched in a pattern of stars. Everything spoke of modest means but genuine care. It was nothing like her room in Boston, with its wallpaper and vanity and shelves of books, yet somehow it felt safer than anywhere she'd been in weeks. Maggie returned carrying a wooden tray laden with a steaming bowl of stew, thick slices of bread, and a cup of what smelled like coffee. The aroma made Amelia's stomach clench with sudden, desperate hunger. "Eat slowly," Maggie warned, setting the tray across Amelia's lap. "Your stomach's been empty too long. Don't want you making yourself sick." Amelia tried to heed the advice, but the first taste of the stew, rich with beef and potatoes and carrots, made restraint nearly impossible. She'd been given scraps over the past 3 days, nothing substantial, nothing that could properly be called a meal. This was real food prepared with care, and her body responded with overwhelming need. Maggie watched with satisfaction as Amelia ate, saying nothing, just rocking slowly in her chair. When Amelia had finished half the bowl and was forcing herself to slow down, the older woman finally spoke. Owen told me what happened in Promise Creek, how he bought you at auction. Her tone was carefully neutral. That must have been terrifying.
This story was posted on the channel
worst
west
moment
of
of my
Betrayal.
life,
Please do not
Amelia said quietly,
repost it
setting
in any
down her
form.
spoon. Until he spoke up. Then it became something else. I still don't fully understand what, but something else. Owen's always had a fierce sense of right and wrong, Maggie said. Gets him in trouble sometimes, but it also makes him the kind of man who will step into hell itself if he thinks someone needs saving. She paused, her eyes shrewd. He paid $100 for you. That's not a small sum, not out here. But he didn't do it to own you, you understand. He did it to free you. I know, Amelia said. Or at least I think I know. But Maggie, what happens now? I have nothing. No money, no belongings, no way to reach my father in Boston or to continue to San Francisco. That bill of sale the auctioneer gave him, legally, doesn't that make me... She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't speak the word that made her stomach turn. Makes you nothing, Maggie said firmly. That paper's not worth the ink it's written in. You're a free woman, same as you always were. Owen knows it. I know it, and you better know it too. The only question is what you want to do next. I was supposed to take a position at a ladies' academy in San Francisco, Amelia said, her voice distant. Teaching literature and composition. I had letters of introduction references from my previous employer in Boston. All of it was in my trunk on that stagecoach. All of it is gone now. Letters can be replaced. References can be resent. Maggie leaned forward, her expression intent. But first you need to heal, and you need to decide whether San Francisco is still where you want to go. After what you've been through, it's allowed to change your mind. Before Amelia could respond, the sound of boots on the porch announced Owen's return. He appeared in the doorway a moment later, hat in hand, his face showing the weariness of a long day. Sorry to interrupt, he said, his eyes moving between the two women. Just wanted to check that everything was all right before I turned in. Everything's fine, Maggie assured him. Amelia was just finishing her dinner. Come in, sit down. You look like you could use some coffee. Owen hesitated, clearly reluctant to intrude, but Maggie was already on her feet, bustling past him toward what Amelia assumed was the kitchen. Left alone with Owen. Amelia felt a sudden awkwardness settle over her. Thank you, she said, because it seemed like something needed to be said. For everything. The meal, the room, the safety. I know I said it before, but... You don't need to keep thanking me, Owen interrupted gently. He moved into the room but kept a respectful distance, leaning against the doorframe rather than sitting. Just glad you're looking better. Maggie, take good care of you. She's been wonderful. Amelia set the tray aside, suddenly very aware that she was in a nightgown, however modest, in the presence of a man she'd only met hours ago. Mr. Zachariah, about your telegram to the marshal. Owen, he corrected. No need for formality out here. And the marshal's name is John Hartley. Good man, honest. I told him what happened, that you were kidnapped and sold, that you're safe here for now. He said he'd ride out within the week to take your statement and see about tracking down the men who did this. A week. Amelia's heart sank. I was hoping, that is, I need to contact my father and the academy in San Francisco. They'll be expecting me. When I don't arrive, I sent another telegram, Owen said, to the San Francisco Ladies Academy, explaining there'd been an incident and you were delayed but safe. Didn't give details. Figured you'd want to do that yourself when you were ready. Also asked if they had a forwarding address for your family in Boston. The relief that flooded through Amelia was so intense it left her lightheaded. You did that without me even asking. Seemed like the logical thing to do. Owen shifted his weight, looking uncomfortable with her gratitude. Figured you had people worrying about you. Better they know you're alive than spend weeks wondering. Maggie reappeared with coffee for Owen and herself, settling back into her rocking chair with the ease of someone who'd done this many times before. Owen took his cup with a nod of thanks, but remained standing as if ready to leave at the first sign he wasn't wanted. The marshal said something else. Owen continued, his tone becoming more serious. There's been reports of stagecoach attacks along that route for the past 2 months. 3 separate incidents, all the same pattern. Masked riders. Driver killed passengers, either killed or taken. The territorial governors put pressure on the marshal's office to stop it. Then I'm not the first, Amelia said quietly. They've done this before. Looks that way. Owen's jaw tightened. Hartley thinks it's the Harding gang. They've been operating out of the territories for years, robbery, kidnapping, worse. Leader's a man named Clayton Harding. Got a reputation for being smart and ruthless. His brother Silas runs with him along with 4 or 5 others whose names change depending on who gets caught or killed. The names meant nothing to Amelia, but the implications were clear. And these men know I'm here. They know you bought me. What if they come back, say, they won't? Owen's certainty was absolute. They got paid, and they're not stupid enough to draw more attention by coming after someone who's already been sold. Far as they're concerned, the transaction's done, and they're in the clear. But you told the marshal about them, Amelia pressed. Won't that make them angry? Won't they want to let them be angry? There was steel in Owen's voice now. I'm not going to let murderers walk free just because it's easier. And you're not going to be a prisoner to fear. You're safe here, Amelia. I promise you that. The use of her first name spoken with such quiet conviction sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She looked at this man who had stepped out of a crowd to save a stranger who had spent money he likely couldn't afford to spare, who was now standing in his own home, looking utterly determined to protect her from anything the world might throw their way. Why? The question escaped before she could stop it. Why would you risk so much for someone you don't know? Owen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if looking at something only he could see. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 6 years ago, I was working a ranch down in New Mexico territory. Owner had a daughter, sweet girl about 19, who wanted to marry a farmhand from a neighboring spread. Her father forbid it, said the boy wasn't good enough, didn't have prospects. So she ran off to marry him anyway. He paused, his hands tightening on his coffee cup. They got about 20 miles before they ran into trouble. Apaches maybe, or outlaws, never knew for sure. The boy was killed outright. The girl was taken. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. We formed a search party. Owen continued, his voice steady but strained. Tracked them for 3 days. But by the time we found her, he stopped, swallowed hard. By the time we found her, it was too late. She was alive, but what they'd done to her, she wasn't the same girl, never would be again. She died of fever 2 weeks later, but I think part of her had already died out there in the desert. I'm so sorry, Amelia whispered. Her name was Emily, Owen said, meeting Amelia's eyes directly. And I swore that day that if I ever had the chance to stop something like that from happening again, I would. No hesitation, no second thoughts. So when I saw you standing on that auction block, looking so scared but still holding your head high, still refusing to break, I heard my own voice making that bid before I'd even decided to do it. The room fell silent except for the gentle creak of Maggie's rocking chair. Amelia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were different from the tears she'd shed earlier. These were tears of understanding, of recognition that the man standing before her carried his own scars, his own ghosts. Emily would be proud of you, Maggie said softly, speaking for the first time since Owen had started his story. For what you did today, for the man you've become. Owen nodded but said nothing, his throat working as he took a long drink of coffee. After a moment he straightened, seeming to shake off the melancholy that had settled over him. It's late, he said. You should rest. Tomorrow we can talk more about getting messages to your father and sorting out your situation. For tonight, just know you're safe. Where will you sleep? Amelia asked suddenly, realizing she was occupying what might be the only bedroom. I'll bunk in the barn, Owen said. Done it plenty of times before. Absolutely not, Maggie interjected firmly. You'll sleep in your own house, Owen Zachariah. I'll stay here with Amelia tonight, keep her company, make sure she's all right. There's a cot in the storeroom I can set up. You take your own bed in the back room. Owen looked like he might argue, but something in Maggie's expression stopped him. All right, he conceded. Thank you, Maggie. Nothing to thank me for. Now get some rest. Morning comes early on a ranch. Owen nodded to both women and disappeared down a hallway, his footsteps fading into silence. Maggie stood and began gathering the dinner dishes, her movements efficient and practiced. He's a good man, she said quietly. Best I've known, and I've known plenty. Don't let that rough exterior fool you. He's got a heart soft as butter under all that leather and dust. I can see that, Amelia said. But Maggie, what you said about staying here tonight, you don't have to do that.
This story was
I'll be
posted
fine
on the
alone.
channel west of
Maggie
Betrayal.
fixed her with a
Please
look
do
that
not
brooked no
repost it
argument.
in any form.
Child, you've been through hell. You need someone nearby, even if it's just for the comfort of hearing another person breathing in the next room. No shame in that. Besides, and here her expression softened slightly, I think maybe I need the company too. Gets lonely on my own spread sometimes. This is a nice change. Amelia felt her throat tighten with emotion. You've both been so kind. I don't know how I'll ever repay. Stop right there, Maggie interrupted. This isn't about repayment. This is about decent people helping each other survive in a hard land. You'd do the same if our positions were reversed, wouldn't you? Of course, but then there's nothing more to say on the matter. Maggie collected the tray and headed toward the door. I'm going to fetch that cot and some bedding. You lie back down and close your eyes. Doctor's orders. You're not a doctor, Amelia pointed out, but she was smiling despite herself. I've patched up enough ranch hands and cowboys to qualify, Maggie shot back. Now rest. We'll have plenty of time to talk tomorrow. Left alone again, Amelia did as she was told, settling back against the pillows and pulling the quilt up to her chin. Her body ached in a dozen places, her wrists from the ropes, her shoulders from rough handling, her head from the blow that had opened the cut above her eye. But underneath the physical pain was something else, something she was almost afraid to acknowledge. Hope. For the first time since the stagecoach attack, she felt the stirring of genuine hope that she might survive. This might find her way back to some semblance of normal life. Owen and Maggie had given her that gift without asking anything in return, and the magnitude of it was almost overwhelming. She thought about what Owen had told her about Emily, about the promise he'd made 6 years ago.
It explained so much about his actions at the auction, about the fierce protectiveness in his voice when he'd declared her mine to protect. He hadn't been claiming ownership, he'd been drawing a line between her and harm, making himself a shield against the brutality of the frontier. How many men would do such a thing for a complete stranger? How many men would risk their own safety and spend their hard-earned money for someone they'd never met? Not many, she thought. Not many at all. The sound of Maggie returning with the cot interrupted her musings. The older woman set up her makeshift bed with practiced efficiency, chatting quietly about the ranch and the territory and the various characters who populated Promise Creek. Most of them are decent enough, Maggie said as she shook out a blanket. Rough around the edges, sure, but trying to make honest livings in a hard place. Then there's the others, the ones who came west because they couldn't survive back east either, because they weren't smart enough or because they were running from something. Those are the ones you have to watch. The men at the auction, Amelia said. Which type were they? Mix of both, Maggie replied. Some just curious about the commotion, some looking for cheap labor or a wife who couldn't say no, and then the outlaws themselves watching to make sure their merchandise sold proper. She settled onto the cot with a soft grunt. Promise Creek sits right on the edge of law and chaos, Amelia. Always has. It's close enough to Fort Yuma to pretend it's civilization, but far enough into the territories that a lot of things get overlooked. Makes it a dangerous place for someone like you. Someone like me. Educated, refined, alone. You stand out like a rose in a cactus patch. That makes you either valuable or vulnerable depending on who's looking. Maggie propped herself up on one elbow. That's why what Owen did was so important. By buying you publicly and declaring you under his protection, he made it clear you weren't alone anymore. Anyone who wants to bother you now has to go through him first. But that puts him in danger, Amelia protested. What if those outlaws decide they want me back? What if they... They won't, Maggie said with the same certainty Owen had shown. Because Owen Zachariah isn't some soft Easterner they can push around. He spent 5 years as a scout for the Army tracking Apaches through terrain that would kill most men in a day. He's been in gunfights, Indian raids, cattle wars. He can handle himself and everybody in Promise Creek knows it. The Harding gang might be dangerous, but they're not stupid enough to start a war with someone like Owen over a woman they've already sold. The description of Owen as a former Army scout, a man familiar with violence and survival, should have frightened Amelia. Instead, it reassured her. He wasn't just some idealistic cowboy playing at heroism. He was a man who understood exactly what he'd done and what risks he'd taken. And he'd done it anyway. "You care about him," Amelia observed quietly. "I can hear it in your voice." Maggie was silent for a moment. "Owen was married once," she finally said. "Did he tell you that—" "No." "Figured he wouldn't. Doesn't talk about it much." Maggie lay back on her cot, staring at the ceiling. "Her name was Catherine. Pretty little thing from back East Virginia, I think. They met when he was working a drive through Texas. She was visiting her uncle, and Owen swept her off her feet with that quiet intensity of his. They married quick and came out here to start the ranch." "What happened to her?" Amelia asked, though she had a sinking feeling she already knew the answer. "Fever took her 3 years into their marriage. One day she was fine, laughing and making plans for spring planting. 3 days later she was gone." Maggie's voice was heavy with old sorrow. Owen near about lost his mind with grief. He'd loved her something fierce, and losing her broke something in him. Took him a long time to put himself back together. "How long ago was this?" 4 years this past April." Maggie turned her head to look at Amelia. "He hasn't looked at another woman since. Not in that way. Most folks figured he'd be alone the rest of his life, married to her memory. That's why what he did today is even more remarkable. He risked his heart as well as his hide stepping in like that." "Risked his heart?" Amelia's voice came out smaller than she intended. "I don't understand. Don't you—" Maggie's eyes were knowing. "He brought you to his home, Amelia. To the place he built with Catherine, the place where all his memories of her live. That's not nothing. That's opening a door he's kept closed for 4 years. Whether he realizes it yet or not, that means something." Amelia's mind raced. She hadn't thought about it from that perspective, hadn't considered what it might cost Owen emotionally to bring a woman into the home he'd shared with his dead wife. She'd been so focused on her own trauma, her own needs, that she hadn't fully appreciated the complexity of his gesture. "I should leave," she said suddenly. "As soon as the marshal comes, as soon as I can arrange passage to San Francisco, I should go. I don't want to cause him pain by—" "Hush now," Maggie interrupted. "You're not causing anyone pain. If anything, having someone to protect might be exactly what Owen needs. Give him a purpose beyond just surviving each day. And besides," she added more gently, "you've got your own healing to do before you're ready to go anywhere. These things can't be rushed." "But—" "No buts. We'll take this one day at a time, just like Owen said. Tomorrow you'll have breakfast, maybe take a walk around the property if you're feeling up to it. Get your bearings, let your body rest. Then we'll see about contacting your father and sorting out your plans. But tonight you sleep." "Agreed." Amelia wanted to argue, wanted to insist that she wasn't some fragile thing that needed coddling, but the truth was, she was exhausted to her bones, and the prospect of just surrendering to sleep was almost unbearably appealing. "Agreed," she whispered. "Good girl." Maggie reached up and turned down the oil lamp, plunging the room into gentle darkness, relieved only by moonlight streaming through the window. "Sleep well, Amelia Prescott. Tomorrow's a new day." Amelia closed her eyes, listening to Maggie's breathing gradually even out into the rhythm of sleep. But she herself remained awake for a long time, her mind turning over everything she'd learned, everything she'd experienced. 6 days ago, she'd been in Boston saying goodbye to her father and boarding a train west with dreams of adventure and independence. She'd imagined herself teaching refined young ladies in San Francisco, attending concerts and lectures, building a life of purpose and dignity. She'd never imagined this, the violence, the terror, the degradation of being sold like property. But she'd also never imagined Owen Zachariah stepping out of a crowd to save her. Never imagined Maggie Thornton's fierce kindness, never imagined finding sanctuary in an adobe ranch house under the vast Arizona sky. Life, she was learning, rarely followed the paths you laid out for it. Sometimes it dragged you through hell, and sometimes, when you least expected it, it gave you guardian angels in the form of a quiet cowboy and a sharp-tongued widow. As sleep finally began to claim her, Amelia thought about Owen's words, "She's mine to protect." 4 simple words that had changed everything. They'd given her safety when she'd had none hope, when despair had seemed absolute. Tomorrow she would think about the future, about San Francisco and her father, and all the complicated questions that needed answering. Tomorrow she would be practical and sensible. But tonight in this room filled with moonlight and the sound of another woman's gentle breathing, Amelia simply let herself feel grateful. Grateful to be alive. Grateful to be safe. Grateful for the unexpected mercy of strangers who had become in the space
This
of a
story
single
was
terrible
posted
day,
on the channel
closest
west
thing
of
she had to
Betrayal.
family. in
Please
this
do not
vast,
repost it
unforgiving
in any
land.
form.
Outside, a coyote called to the moon, its voice lonely and wild. But inside these adobe walls, Amelia felt only peace. And for now, that was enough. The morning light came soft and golden through the window, waking Amelia with a gentleness she hadn't known in days. For the second time, she experienced that disorienting moment of not knowing where she was, followed by the rush of memory. But this time the memory brought less fear and more simple acceptance. She was at Owen Zachariah's ranch. She was safe. She was beginning to heal. Maggie's cot was empty, the blankets already folded neatly at its foot. From somewhere beyond the bedroom, Amelia could hear the quiet sounds of morning routine, the clank of cookware, the splash of water, low voices in conversation. The normalcy of it was almost surreal after days of chaos. She rose slowly, testing her body's readiness. Everything still ached, but it was a manageable pain now dulled by rest and proper food. Her dress, the ruined green traveling dress, had been replaced by a simple cotton gown hanging on a peg by the door. It was clearly one of Maggie's, too large in the shoulders and too short in the hem, but clean and whole. Amelia dressed quickly, braided her hair as best she could without a proper mirror, and ventured out of the bedroom. The main room of the house was brighter in daylight sunbeams slanting through windows that faced east. Owen sat at the rough table papers spread before him, a cup of coffee steaming at his elbow. He looked up as she entered, and something in his expression softened. "Morning," he said simply. "You sleep all right." "Better than I have in days," Amelia admitted. "Thank you for asking." "Coffee's hot. Maggie's making breakfast." He gestured to a chair across from him. "Join me." Amelia sat accepting the cup of coffee Maggie poured before the older woman returned to the stove. The brew was strong and black, nothing like the delicate tea she'd been accustomed to in Boston, but it cleared her head and warmed her from within. "These are the replies to yesterday's telegrams," Owen said, indicating the papers before him. "A boy from town brought them out early this morning. Your academy in San Francisco sent one, and there's one from a Marshall Hartley." Amelia's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the telegram from the academy. She unfolded it carefully, reading the brief message twice to make sure she understood. "Miss Prescott, relieved to hear you are safe. Position still available when you are recovered. Can provide emergency funds if needed. Please advise timeline. Director M. Ashford." "They still want me," she breathed, hardly believing it. "After everything, they still want me to come." "Why wouldn't they?" Owen asked, his tone genuinely puzzled. "You're still the same person they hired. What happened to you wasn't your fault." "I know, but I thought—" Amelia trailed off, not sure how to explain the shame she'd been carrying, the feeling that somehow being sold had marked her as damaged goods. "You thought being a victim made you less worthy?" Maggie said from the stove, her voice matter of fact. "It doesn't. Never has, never will. Those folks in San Francisco understand that, seems like. Question is, do you—" The words hit Amelia like cold water, shocking and clarifying at once. Maggie was right. She'd been carrying shame that didn't belong to her, accepting blame for violence done to her by others. "I'm trying to," she said quietly. "That's all anyone can ask," Owen replied. He pushed the second telegram toward her. "This one's from Marshall Hartley. He'll be here day after tomorrow to take your statement. He's also putting together information about the Harding gang's movements. See if he can track them down before they hit another stage." Amelia read Hartley's message, noting the formal language and the promise of justice. It should have comforted her. Instead, it sent a chill down her spine. "When I give my statement," she said slowly, "I'll have to identify them, won't I? Describe them, testify against them if they're caught." "Yes," Owen confirmed. "That's usually how it works." "Then they'll know I talked. They'll know I helped the law find them." Her voice rose slightly, despite her efforts to stay calm. "Won't that make me a target?" Owen leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "Maybe. But here's the thing, Amelia, you're already a target if they decide you're worth coming after. Being silent won't protect you if they want revenge for being sold out. At least this way you're helping put them behind bars where they can't hurt you or anyone else. Owen's right, Maggie added, bringing plates of eggs and biscuits to the table. And besides, you won't be alone in this. Marshall Hartley's good at his job. If anyone can catch those bastards, pardon my language, it's him. They ate in companionable silence for a while, the food giving Amelia something to focus on besides her churning thoughts. The eggs were perfectly cooked, the biscuits light and buttery. Normal things, everyday things that felt like miracles after days of deprivation. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Owen said when their plates were nearly empty. The matter of that bill of sale. Amelia's fork froze halfway to her mouth. What about it? I want to burn it, Owen said bluntly. Destroy it completely so there's no chance anyone could ever use it to claim you belong to me or anyone else. But I wanted your permission first. It's your life that paper talks about. You should have a say in what happens to it. The fact that he was asking her permission, treating her as having agency over something that legally made her property, brought unexpected tears to Amelia's eyes. Burn it, she said fiercely. Please, I never want to see that document again. Owen nodded and rose from the table, retrieving the folded paper from his vest pocket. He walked to the fireplace where coals from last night's fire still glowed faintly. He placed the bill of sale directly on the coals and used the poker to push it deep into the heat. They all watched in silence as the paper caught fire, the words dissolving into ash and smoke. When nothing remained but flakes of gray drifting up the chimney, Owen turned back to face them. That's done then, he said. Far as I'm concerned, that whole ugly business is over. Not quite over, Maggie corrected gently. Not until those outlaws are caught and Amelia's safely on her way to San Francisco. But it's a start. Amelia stared at the fireplace where the bill of sale had been consumed, feeling something tight in her chest finally begin to loosen. She was free, truly free now, not bound even by a piece of paper that should never have existed. Thank you, she whispered, looking at Owen with an intensity that made him shift uncomfortably. Thank you for understanding how much that mattered. Seemed like the right thing to do, he said, his typical response to being thanked. Then, as if eager to move past the emotional moment, he added, Maggie, I need to ride out to the north pasture today, check on the cattle. You mind staying here with Amelia? Already planned on it, Maggie replied. Thought maybe I'd help Amelia write those letters she needs to send, one to her father, one to the academy. That boy who brought the telegrams can take them back to town for posting. Good. Owen collected his hat from a peg by the door. I should be back before supper. You need anything? Maggie's a crack shot with the rifle over the mantel. Not that I expect trouble, but better safe than sorry, Maggie finished. We'll be fine, Owen. Go on now. Owen hesitated in the doorway, his eyes moving between the two women as if reluctant to leave them. Finally, he nodded and disappeared outside his bootsteps, fading as he headed toward the barn. Alone with Maggie, Amelia helped clear the breakfast dishes, finding comfort in the simple domestic task. Her hands knew what to do, even if her mind was still spinning with all that had happened, all that still needed to be faced. You're quiet this morning, Maggie observed as they worked. More than yesterday. I'm thinking, Amelia admitted, but about everything, about what happens next. And what are you thinking about what happens next? Amelia dried a plate carefully before speaking. I should go to San Francisco. It's what I planned, what I worked toward. The Academy is still willing to take me. It would be foolish to throw away that opportunity. Should is a dangerous word, Maggie said. Often means you're doing what you think you ought to do rather than what you want to do. But what I want doesn't matter right now, Amelia protested. I have to be practical. I have no money, no resources. My father will send funds once he knows I'm alive, but until then, I'm dependent on Owen's charity. The sooner I can get to San Francisco and start earning my own living, the better. Is that the only reason you want to go? Maggie asked shrewdly. To earn your keep and stop being a burden. Amelia opened her mouth to say yes, then closed it again. The truth was more complicated than she wanted to admit, even to herself. I don't know anymore, she finally said. A week ago, I knew exactly what I wanted. Now everything's changed and I can't see the path forward clearly. Then maybe you need to stop trying to see the whole path, Maggie suggested. Maybe you just need to take the next step and then the next one after that. Let the rest reveal itself in time.
But that's not how I've ever lived my life, Amelia said, frustration creeping into her voice.
I've always made plans, set goals, worked towards specific outcomes. That's how I got from Boston to here, by having a clear objective and pursuing it methodically. And look where that careful planning got you, Maggie said, not unkindly. Sometimes life doesn't care about your plans.
This story
Sometimes it
was
just throws
posted
you
on
into
the
the
channel
fire and
west
you have
of
to find your
Betrayal.
way through as best
Please
you
do
can.
not repost it
That's
in
not
any
a failure,
form.
Amelia. That's survival. The words resonated with something deep in Amelia's chest, some truth she'd been avoiding since the stagecoach attack. She had been holding on to her plans, her identity as a teacher, her goal of reaching San Francisco like a lifeline. But maybe what she needed wasn't to cling tighter. Maybe what she needed was to let go and see what remained when the plans fell away. I'm scared, she whispered. I'm scared that if I'm not a teacher heading to San Francisco, I don't know who I am anymore. Maggie set down the dish she'd been washing and turned to face Amelia fully, her expression fierce and tender at once. You're Amelia Prescott, and you're the strongest woman I've met in a long time. You survived things that would have broken most people. You held your head high on that auction block when you had every right to fall apart. And now you're here healing, finding your feet again. That's who you are. The rest teacher traveler. Whatever else, those are just things you do. They're not who you are at your core. The truth of it hit Amelia like a revelation. She'd been defining herself by her accomplishments, her plans, her external circumstances. But Maggie was right. Those were just the surface. Underneath was something more fundamental, something that had survived the violence and fear and degradation. Herself. Just herself stripped down to essentials. How did you get so wise? Amelia asked, managing a watery smile. By living long enough to make every mistake in the book, Maggie replied with a snort. Now come on, let's get those letters written before the messenger boy has to head back to town. They settled at the table with paper and ink, and Amelia began the difficult task of explaining to her father what had happened. She started and stopped several times, unable to find words that would convey the truth without causing him unbearable worry. Finally, she settled on simplicity. The stagecoach had been attacked. She had been taken by outlaws, but was now safe. She was staying with good people who were helping her recover. She asked him to send funds to Promise Creek for her continued journey to San Francisco, and she promised to write again soon with more details. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. The full story could wait until she saw him in person, assuming she ever did. Boston felt very far away now, another lifetime entirely. The letter to the academy was easier. She thanked Director Ashford for the kind words and confirmed that she still intended to take the position, though she couldn't yet provide a firm arrival date. She would telegraph as soon as her plans were settled. As she sealed both letters, Amelia felt a weight settle over her. She was committing now, telling people she would come to San Francisco. There would be no backing out without serious consequences, professional and personal. But was it what she truly wanted? Or was it just what she thought she should want? The question haunted her through the rest of the morning as she and Maggie worked together cleaning and mending and preparing food for supper. Maggie taught her how to make proper biscuits, how to judge when meat was cooked through, how to manage a kitchen with limited supplies. Practical skills that Amelia's refined Boston education had never covered. By afternoon, when Owen returned dusty and tired from his work, Amelia had settled into the rhythm of the ranch in a way that surprised her. There was something deeply satisfying about the physical work, the tangible results of her efforts. In Boston, she'd spent her days reading and writing, working with abstract ideas. Here, everything was concrete food, prepared clothes, mended, order maintained through steady, honest labor. How was the north pasture? Maggie asked as Owen washed up at the basin by the door. Cattle looked good. Found some fence damage from a storm, but nothing major. He dried his face and hands, then turned to Amelia. You holding up all right? I am, she said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. Better than I expected, actually. Good. Owen's smile was brief but genuine. Letters get sent off to town. An hour ago. We should hear back from my father within the week, I imagine. The telegram will reach Boston before the letter, so he'll know to send funds. Owen nodded, but something in his expression made Amelia think he wanted to say more. Before she could ask, Maggie intervened. Owen, would you take Amelia outside for a bit? Show her around the property? She's been cooped up inside all day and some fresh air would do her good. Owen looked surprised, but recovered quickly. Sure, if Amelia wants. I'd like that, Amelia said, though she suspected Maggie's suggestion had less to do with fresh air and more to do with giving them time alone together. They stepped out into the afternoon sun, the heat immediate and intense, but somehow less oppressive than it had been on the auction block. Owen led her first to the corral, where several horses lifted their heads to watch their approach. This is the working stock, Owen explained, gesturing to the horses. That bay gelding there, that's Thunder, the one I rode into town yesterday. Steady as they come, smart too. The mare beside him is Rosie. She's got a sweet temperament, but stubborn as a mule when she doesn't want to do something. As he spoke about the horses describing their quirks and personalities, Amelia heard the affection in his voice. These weren't just animals to him, they were companions, partners in the hard work of survival. "Do you think," she asked hesitantly, "that I might learn to ride properly? I mean, not just sitting behind someone else in the saddle." Owen looked at her with surprise and something else approval, maybe, or respect. "I think you'd be a natural," he said, "but we should wait until you're fully healed. Don't want to risk opening any wounds or straining anything that's still mending." They walked on, Owen pointing out the various outbuildings, the barn where equipment and feed were stored, the smokehouse, the well that provided water for the ranch. Everything was well maintained, but clearly built for function over form. This was a working ranch, not a showplace. "How long have you lived here?" Amelia asked as they paused beside a small vegetable garden where tomatoes and squash grew in neat rows. 7 years more or less. Started with just the land and a tent. Built the house with my own hands with help from some neighbors." He gestured toward the horizon. "Maggie's place is about 3 miles that way. There's another ranch 5 miles south, run by a family named Wilson. They're good people. Beyond that, it's pretty isolated until you get to Promise Creek." "Don't you get lonely?" The question escaped before Amelia could consider whether it was too personal. Owen was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Especially at night, when the work's done and there's nothing but silence. But I've learned to make peace with solitude. It's better than the alternative." "What alternative?" "Bad company," he said simply. "I've known men who were so afraid of being alone that they'd tolerate anyone around them no matter how toxic or dangerous. I'd rather have solitude than that." Amelia thought about her life in Boston, where she'd been surrounded by people constantly, her father, their servants, her students, fellow teachers. She'd never truly been alone, not in the way Owen described. But she'd often felt lonely anyway, isolated by the expectations placed on her by the narrow definition of what a proper young woman should be and want. "I think I understand," she said softly. They had walked almost to the edge of the property now, where the cultivated land gave way to raw desert. The landscape was harsh, but strangely beautiful, all muted colors and sharp contrasts. In the distance, mountains rose like ancient sentinels, their peaks still visible against the afternoon sky. "It's different than I imagined," Amelia said, gesturing to the vista before them. "The West, I mean. I thought it would be exciting and romantic, like in the novels. I didn't understand how brutal it could be." "It's both," Owen said. "Brutal and beautiful often at the same time. That's what makes it hard to leave once you've been here long enough. It gets into your blood, this land, makes everything back east seem small and safe and somehow less real." "Is that why you stayed after your wife died?" The question was too personal, but Amelia felt they'd moved past the point where such boundaries mattered. Owen's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from the horizon. "Partly. I thought about going back to Texas where I grew up, but Catherine's buried here. Leaving felt like abandoning her, and this place—" He paused, searching for words. "This place demands everything from you, your strength, your will, your hope. But in return, it gives you freedom, real freedom, the kind that most people never know. I couldn't give that up even for grief." The rawness in his voice made Amelia's heart ache. She had judged him as strong, capable, unshakable, but now she saw the cracks in that armor, the places where pain had marked him as surely as the scar on his jaw. "I'm sorry I'm here," she said impulsively. "Sorry that bringing me to your home has brought back painful memories." Owen turned to look at her fully, then his expression fierce. "Don't apologize for that. What I did yesterday, bringing you here, that was my choice freely made, And you're not causing me pain by being here. If anything, he stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. If anything, having someone to look after has given me something I didn't know I was missing. A purpose beyond just getting through each day. The intensity of his gaze made Amelia's breath catch. For a moment, standing there in the desert sun with the wind pulling at her borrowed dress,
This
she
story
felt
was
something
posted on the
shift
channel
between them.
west of
Some
Betrayal.
recognition
Please
that this
do not
wasn't just a
repost it
stranger
in any
helping a
form.
victim, but two people discovering an unexpected connection. Then the moment passed and Owen stepped back, his expression closing off again. "We should head back," he said. "Maggie will have supper ready soon and you need to keep your strength up." They walked back to the house in silence, but it was a different silence than before, charged with things unspoken, heavy with possibility. As they approached the porch, Owen paused and turned to face her one more time. "Amelia," he said, her name sounding almost formal on his lips. "I want you to know that whatever you decide about San Francisco, about your future, I'll support it. You're free to go or stay as you choose. You don't owe me anything." "I know," she said, though the words felt inadequate. "But Owen, what if I don't know what I want anymore? What if everything that happened changed me too much to go back to who I was?" "Then you figure out who you are now," he replied, "and you build from there. That's all any of us can do." The wisdom in his words settled over her like a benediction. He was right, of course. She couldn't go back to being the Amelia Prescott who had left Boston full of plans and confidence. That woman was gone, transformed by violence into someone harder and more uncertain. But maybe, just maybe, the woman she was becoming could be stronger than the one she'd been. Inside, Maggie had set the table and was dishing out stew. They ate together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed impossible, too vivid to be real. Conversation flowed easily, now comfortable, as if they'd known each other for years rather than days. And as Amelia retired to her room that night with Maggie once again setting up her cot nearby, she realized something profound had shifted. She was no longer just surviving, she was beginning tentatively to imagine a different kind of future. One where the harsh beauty of the desert wasn't something to escape, but something to embrace. One where safety wasn't found by running back to what was familiar, but by staying and facing what was new. One where a quiet cowboy with sad eyes might become something more than just her rescuer. The thoughts should have frightened her. Instead, as sleep claimed her, they brought an unexpected sense of peace. Whatever came next, she would face it, not as the woman she had been, but as the woman she was becoming. And that she thought as dreams began to weave through her consciousness might be enough. The days that followed took on a rhythm that surprised Amelia with its gentle persistence. Each morning she woke to the sound of Maggie moving quietly about the house, and each morning the weight on her chest felt incrementally lighter. The bruises on her wrists faded from purple to yellow. The cut above her eye closed and began to heal, and the nightmares that had jolted her awake those first few nights came less frequently. She found herself settling into the work of the ranch with an ease that would have shocked her Boston acquaintances. Her hands, once soft and ink-stained from years of teaching, began to develop calluses from helping Maggie with the washing, from kneading bread dough, from learning to milk the temperamental goat that Owen kept for fresh dairy. The physical labor was exhausting but oddly satisfying, each completed task a small victory against the chaos that had threatened to consume her. On the third morning after her arrival, Marshal John Hartley rode into the yard just after breakfast. He was a tall man in his late 40s with iron gray hair and eyes that had seen too much violence to be easily shocked. He dismounted with the stiff movements of someone who'd spent too many hours in the saddle, and Owen met him at the porch with a handshake that spoke of old acquaintance. "John," Owen said simply. "Thanks for coming. Wouldn't miss it." Hartley's gaze moved to where Amelia stood in the doorway, Maggie a reassuring presence behind her. "Miss Prescott, I presume I'm Marshal Hartley. I'd like to take your statement about what happened if you're feeling up to it." Amelia's stomach clenched, but she nodded. She'd known this was coming, had prepared herself as best she could. "Of course, Marshal. Would you like to come inside?" They settled around Owen's table, Maggie providing coffee while Hartley produced a worn notebook and pencil. Owen positioned himself near the window, giving them space but staying close enough to offer silent support. The gesture didn't escape Amelia's notice, and she drew strength from his presence. "Take your time," Hartley said, his voice surprisingly gentle. Start from the beginning, from when you first boarded that stagecoach. Tell me everything you remember, no matter how small the detail might seem." So Amelia told him. She described the coach station in Tucson where she'd met Mrs. Henley and the elderly couple from Philadelphia. She recounted the cheerful conversation as they rolled across the desert, Mrs. Henley's stories about her daughter's new baby, the couple's plans to visit their son who'd homesteaded near Sacramento. She remembered the precise moment the driver had shouted a warning, the sound of gunfire, the screaming. Her voice remained steady through most of it, clinical, almost as if she were recounting something that had happened to someone else. But when she reached the part about Mrs. Henley's death, about the driver's body hitting the ground, her composure cracked slightly and Maggie's hand found hers under the table, squeezing tight. "They were masked at first," Amelia continued, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. "6 men, maybe 7. It was hard to count in the chaos. They dragged me from the coach and one of them hit me." She touched the healing cut above her eye. "That's when I learned I was the only survivor. They'd shot the others." "Did any of them say why they let you live?" Hartley's pencil moved steadily across the page. "One of them, I think he was the leader, said I was valuable, that Eastern women fetch good prices in places like Promise Creek." The words still tasted bitter. "He said I should be grateful they didn't just kill me too." Hartley's jaw tightened, but his tone remained professional. "Can you describe this leader? Any distinguishing features?" Amelia closed her eyes, forcing herself to remember faces she'd tried desperately to forget. Tall, maybe 6 feet, dark hair and beard both going gray. He had a scar across his forehead here. She traced a line above her right eyebrow. And he was missing the tip of his left pinky finger. I noticed when he grabbed my arm. "That's Clayton Harding, sure as I'm sitting here," Hartley muttered, making a note. "What about the others?" She described them as best she could, the younger man with the cruel smile, who might have been Clayton's brother, the one with the Mexican accent who'd given her water when the others weren't looking, the heavy-set man who'd driven their wagon. Some faces were clearer than others, burned into her memory by fear and repetition. "They took you to Promise Creek directly?" Hartley asked. "Not directly. We camped one night in the desert. They kept me tied up, barely spoke to me except to tell me to shut up if I made any noise." The memory of that night alone in the darkness with men who viewed her as merchandise made her shudder. "The next day we rode to Promise Creek. They cleaned me up a little, tried to make me look more presentable for the auction." "And that's where Owen stepped in," Hartley said, glancing at his friend. "That's where Owen saved my life," Amelia corrected firmly, "because I have no illusions about what would have happened to me otherwise." Hartley nodded slowly, his expression grim. "Miss Prescott, I need to be straight with you. The Harding gang is one of the most wanted outfits in the territory. They've been operating for years, and we've never been able to pin them down long enough to bring them in. What you've told me today is the most detailed description we've ever gotten from a survivor." "Because there aren't usually survivors," Amelia said quietly. "Exactly." Hartley set down his pencil. "Which means you're potentially a very valuable witness. If we can catch them, if we can bring them to trial, your testimony could put them away for good. Multiple counts of murder, kidnapping, human trafficking, we could hang them legally instead of having to shoot it out in some canyon." "But it also makes her a target," Owen said from his position by the window. His voice was calm but edged with steel. "If they find out she talked to you, if they think she can identify them in court, they'll want to silence her." "I won't lie to you, that's a risk," Hartley admitted, turning back to Amelia. "But we can offer protection. I can arrange for you to stay at Fort Yuma until they're caught. It's not comfortable, but it's secure. Or we can keep you here and station a deputy nearby. Your choice." Amelia's mind raced. Fort Yuma meant safety, but it also meant confinement, being trapped again. The thought made her skin crawl. But staying here meant putting Owen and Maggie in danger, making them targets by association. "What do you think they'll do?" she asked Hartley. "The Hardings, I mean. Do you think they'll come after me?" Hartley was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his words. "Honestly, I think it depends on how much heat we put on them. If we start actively hunting them based on your information, they might decide you're worth the risk of coming after. If we're more subtle, they might just cut their losses and move on to easier prey."
So I'm safest if you don't pursue them, Amelia said flatly. If you let them keep killing and kidnapping people so they don't feel threatened enough to come after me. That's not what I'm saying. But it's what you mean. Amelia's voice hardened. Marshall Hartley, those men killed 4 innocent
This story
people
was
in front of
posted
me.
on the channel
They sold
west
me like
of Betrayal.
livestock.
Please
And
do not
according to you,
repost
they've
it
done this
in any
before
form.
and will do it again.
How can I possibly stay silent knowing that my testimony could stop them?
Amelia,
Owen said quietly, moving closer to the table. Nobody expects you to sacrifice yourself for... I'm not talking about sacrifice, she interrupted, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. I'm talking about responsibility. I survived when others didn't. Doesn't that mean I owe it to them, to Mrs. Henley and those poor people from Philadelphia, to see justice done? Maggie made a soft sound, something between approval and concern. Owen's expression was unreadable, but his eyes held a mixture of pride and worry. Hartley leaned back in his chair, studying Amelia with new respect. You're a brave woman, Miss Prescott, but bravery won't stop a bullet if the Hardings decide to come after you. Then we make sure they can't. Owen set his tone absolute. John, you know I can handle myself, and this ranch is defensible if it comes to that. We've got good sight lines, solid walls, plenty of ammunition. If you're actively hunting the Hardings, they'll be too busy running to worry about coming after one witness. And if I'm wrong, Hartley challenged, if they decide revenge is worth the risk, then they'll have to go through me first, Owen replied simply. And that's not as easy as it sounds. The two men held each other's gaze for a long moment, some unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Hartley nodded. All right, here's what we'll do. I'll take this information back to Fort Yuma and start putting together a pursuit. Quiet-like at first, gathering intel, tracking their movements. I've got contacts throughout the territory who owe me favors. We'll tighten the net slowly so they don't spook and run in this direction. He turned to Amelia. In the meantime, you stay here. Keep your head down, don't go into Promise Creek unless Owen's with you. And Miss Prescott, learn to shoot. If trouble comes, I want you able to defend yourself. I can teach her, Owen said immediately. Starting tomorrow if she's willing. I'm willing, Amelia said, though the thought of holding a gun made her stomach turn. She'd always associated firearms with violence with the men who'd killed her fellow passengers. But Owen was right, this was a hard land and softness could get you killed. Hartley finished his coffee and stood tucking his notebook into his vest. I'll send word when I have updates. Could be days, could be weeks. These things take time. We understand, Owen said, walking him to the door. John, one more thing. The funds for Amelia's passage to San Francisco when they arrive from Boston, can you hold them at the fort safer than keeping that kind of money out here? Consider it done. Hartley settled his hat on his head and turned to Amelia one more time. Miss Prescott, you're doing the right thing. I know it doesn't feel like it now, but speaking up could save lives. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Amelia said, though she wasn't entirely sure it was a promise she could keep. After Hartley rode away, dust trailing behind his horse like a banner, the three of them stood on the porch in silence. The morning sun was climbing higher, promising another scorching day. In the distance, a hawk circled lazily, hunting for prey in the endless expanse of desert. You didn't have to volunteer to teach me to shoot, Amelia said, finally looking at Owen. I could have asked Maggie. Maggie's a fine shot, but I'm better, Owen replied without arrogance, simply stating fact. And if we're going to do this, we're going to do it right. No half measures. He's not wrong, Maggie added. Owen was a scout for the army, like I told you. He can shoot the eye out of a
This
needle
story
at
was
50
posted
yards.
on the channel
You'll learn
west
from the
of
best.
Betrayal.
The
Please
praise
do not
made Owen
repost it
uncomfortable,
in
as
any
always
form.
seemed to. He shifted his weight and looked away, focusing on the horizon. We'll start this afternoon once the worst heat passes. Just basic safety and handling at first. No need to rush into anything. But that afternoon, as Owen set up targets behind the barn, old bottles balanced on fence posts, tin cans arranged in a row, Amelia felt a tremor of nervousness run through her. The gun Owen handed her was heavy and cold, the metal foreign in her palm. This is a Colt revolver, Owen explained, his voice taking on the patient tone of an experienced teacher. 6 shots before you need to reload. It's got a good weight to it, reliable action. Most importantly, for learning, it's not too big for your hands. He showed her how to check if it was loaded. how to hold it properly, how to sight down the barrel. His hands guided hers with professional detachment, adjusting her grip, correcting her stance. But Amelia was intensely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his body in the afternoon sun, of the calluses on his fingers as they touched hers. "The kick will surprise you the first time," he warned. "Don't lock your elbows, let them absorb some of the recoil, and squeeze the trigger, don't pull it, smooth and steady." Her first shot went wide, the explosion louder than she'd expected, the recoil jolting through her arms. Her second shot missed entirely, kicking up dust 3 feet from the nearest target. By the fifth shot, her hands were shaking from tension, and her ears were ringing despite the cotton wadding Maggie had given her to stuff in them. "That's enough for today," Owen said gently, taking the gun from her trembling hands. "You did good for your first time. Most people can't even hit the fence post their first day." "I didn't hit anything," Amelia protested, frustrated with herself. "You hit the ground in approximately the right direction," Owen replied with the ghost of a smile. "That's progress. Tomorrow we'll work on your breathing and trigger control. It takes time, Amelia. Nobody becomes a sharpshooter overnight." They practiced every afternoon after that, and slowly, painfully, Amelia began to improve. Her hands stopped shaking when she gripped the revolver. Her shots started landing closer to the targets, then on them, then eventually through them, with satisfying crashes of breaking glass. Owen was patient but demanding, never satisfied with good enough, always pushing her to be more accurate, more consistent, more confident. "It's not just about hitting what you aim at," he explained one day as she successfully shattered 3 bottles in a row. "It's about being calm under pressure, making decisions quickly, trusting your training when your mind is screaming at you to panic. That's what might save your life if trouble comes." The words should have frightened her, but instead they steeled her resolve. She practiced loading and reloading until she could do it by touch alone. She learned to shoot from different positions, standing, kneeling, prone. Owen even taught her how to fire while moving, though she was still clumsy at that, her skirts tangling around her legs. "Might want to consider wearing trousers when you practice," Maggie suggested one evening as they prepared supper. "I've got some that might fit you from my younger days. More practical than skirts for this kind of work." The idea of wearing men's clothing would have scandalized Amelia's Boston social circle, but out here, practicality mattered more than propriety. The next day, she appeared at practice in a pair of Maggie's old work pants, cinched tight with a belt, and found that moving was suddenly much easier. Owen's only comment was the approving nod before he returned to setting up the day's targets. As the days stretched into a week, then 2, Amelia found herself thinking less about San Francisco and more about the life unfolding around her on the ranch. She learned the names of all the horses, discovered which one would tolerate her inexperienced handling and which ones required Owen's firmer touch. She helped Maggie preserve vegetables from the garden, learning the art of canning and pickling that would keep them fed through the winter. She even assisted Owen with mending fence line, her hands blistering from the unfamiliar work of stringing wire. The telegram from her father arrived on the 12th day, delivered by the same messenger boy who'd brought the previous communications. Amelia opened it with trembling hands, emotion welling up as she read his words. "Amelia, my dear child, thank God you are alive. Funds wired to Fort Yuma as requested. Return home immediately. I will arrange everything. Your loving father." She read it 3 times, then folded it carefully and tucked it into her pocket. Owen and Maggie both watched her, waiting for her reaction, but she found she couldn't articulate what she was feeling. Relief that her father knew she was safe. Guilt that she'd caused him such worry. And underneath it all, a strange reluctance she couldn't quite name. "Good news, I hope," Maggie ventured. "He's sending money," Amelia said. "Enough to get me back to Boston from the sound of it. He wants me to come home." "And what do you want?" Owen asked quietly. It was the question she'd been avoiding, the one that kept her awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Maggie snored softly on her cot. What did she want? 2 weeks ago, the answer would have been obvious: to go to San Francisco, to teach, to build the independent life she'd dreamed of. But now, covered in dust and wearing borrowed trousers with calluses forming on her palms and the weight of a revolver comfortable at her hip, she wasn't sure anymore. "I don't know," she admitted. "Is that terrible? My father wants me safe. The academy wants me to come teach, and I'm standing here in the middle of the Arizona desert not knowing what I want. It's not terrible, Maggie said firmly. It's honest, and honesty is the first step to figuring things out.
This story
That
was
night, unable
posted
to
on the
sleep,
channel west
Amelia
of the
slipped out of
trail.
the bedroom
Please
and
do
found
not
Owen
repost
sitting on the
it in
porch,
any
a cup of
form.
coffee cooling in his hands. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. He looked up as she approached, but didn't seem surprised. "Can't sleep either," he asked. "Too much thinking." She settled onto the porch step beside him, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "Owen, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you decided to buy me at that auction, did you know what you were getting yourself into? The danger, the responsibility, the complications?" Owen was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Then he set down his coffee and turned to face her, his expression serious in the moonlight. "I knew some of it," he said slowly. "Knew I'd be putting myself between you and whoever might want to hurt you. Knew it would change things having someone else to think about besides myself and the horses." He paused. "What I didn't know was how much it would matter, how much you would matter." Amelia's breath caught. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Owen struggled with the words, clearly uncomfortable with the vulnerability they required. "I mean that when I brought you here, I thought I was just doing the right thing, saving someone who needed saving, then helping them get back to their life. Simple. Straightforward. But Amelia, it hasn't been simple. Having you here watching you heal and get stronger, teaching you to shoot, listening to you laugh with Maggie, it's made me remember things I thought I'd forgotten." "What things?" "What it feels like to have someone to come home to. What it means to worry about someone other than yourself. What it's like to wake up in the morning with a reason to get out of bed beyond just surviving another day." His voice dropped lower. "I'm not saying this right. I'm no good with words like you are. But what I'm trying to say is that you've become important to me, more important than I meant to let happen. And if you decide to go to San Francisco or back to Boston, I'll support that choice. But I'd be lying if I said part of me didn't hope you'd stay." The confession hung in the air between them, fragile and momentous. Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs, 1,000 thoughts colliding in her mind. She'd felt the connection growing between them, the way conversation came easier each day, the way his rare smiles made warmth spread through her chest. But she'd told herself it was just gratitude, just the natural bond between someone saved and their rescuer. Now hearing him put words to what she'd been trying not to acknowledge, she couldn't hide behind that excuse anymore. "Owen," she said carefully, "I care about you too, more than I should probably admit. But I don't know if that's real or if it's just because you saved me, because you've shown me kindness when I was at my lowest. How can I trust my own feelings when everything's so confused?" "You can't," Owen said simply. "Not yet. That's why I'm not asking you for anything, not making any demands. I'm just being honest with you, same as you've been honest with me. Whatever you decide, whatever you feel, that's yours to work out in your own time. And if I decide to leave, then I'll take you to the stagecoach station myself, make sure you get on safely, and wish you well." His jaw tightened slightly. "Won't lie and say it won't hurt. But I'd rather you go knowing the truth than leave thinking I didn't care." Amelia reached out impulsively and took his hand, feeling the roughness of his palm against her own work-hardened skin. "Thank you for telling me, for being honest. I promise I'll think about what you've said." "That's all I can ask." He squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "You should get some sleep. Tomorrow Maggie wants to teach you how to make proper preserves, and she's a tyrant in the kitchen." Amelia laughed softly and stood. "She
This
is rather
story was
formidable.
posted on the channel west
She's one of the best
trail.
people I know."
Please do not
Owen said.
repost it in
"You
any
two have
form.
been good for each other." As Amelia returned to her room, she found Maggie sitting up on her cot, clearly having been awake the whole time. The older woman said nothing, just gave her a knowing look that spoke volumes. Amelia blushed and climbed into bed, but sleep was even more elusive now than it had been before. Owen cared for her, had admitted it plainly without games or manipulation. And she cared for him too, though whether that caring was love or gratitude or something else entirely she honestly couldn't say. The next morning brought unexpected news. The messenger boy arrived again this time with a letter from the territorial marshal. Owen read it twice, his expression growing grimmer before passing it to Amelia. Hartley had gotten leads on the Harding gang's location.
They'd been spotted near a town called Copper Springs, 3 days' ride to the north. He was assembling a posse to go after them, and he expected to have them in custody within the week. He warned that if anything went wrong, if the gang escaped the net, they might head south toward Mexico, which meant they'd pass through the area near Promise Creek. He's saying they might come here, Amelia said, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. It's a possibility, Owen confirmed. If they're on the run and desperate, this ranch is isolated enough to make a good hiding place. Or they might decide to settle the score with you before they flee the territory. What do? We prepare. Owen stood and began moving around the house with purposeful efficiency. Maggie, I need you to go into town, quietly spread word to the Wilsons and the other neighbors that we might have trouble. Tell them to keep their eyes open. Amelia, check all the ammunition. Make sure we've got plenty loaded and ready. I'm going to board up the windows we don't need for sight lines and move some supplies inside in case we end up under siege. The calm authority in his voice was reassuring. This wasn't panic, this was preparation. The measured response of someone who'd been in dangerous situations before and survived them. Over the next 2 days, the ranch transformed into a fortress. Owen reinforced the doors with additional timber, created firing positions at the windows, and moved anything flammable away from the house. He taught Amelia and Maggie a system of watches rotating through the night, so someone was always alert. The Wilsons sent their 2 oldest sons to help young men in their 20s, who Owen stationed in the barn with rifles and clear instructions. The waiting was almost worse than the original fear had been. Every sound made Amelia jump. Every movement in the darkness sent her hand to the revolver Owen had insisted she keep on her person at all times. She barely slept even during her off-watch hours, too keyed up to relax. On the 3rd night, the dog started barking. Owen was up instantly, rifle in hand, moving to the window with the practiced silence of someone who'd done this before. Amelia grabbed her revolver and joined him, heart hammering. Maggie took position at the opposite window, her own rifle steady in her experienced hands. How many? Maggie whispered. Can't tell yet, Owen replied. Could be nothing, could be coyotes. Could be trouble. In the barn, they could hear the Wilson boys readying their weapons. The night was moonless, the darkness thick and impenetrable beyond the small circle of lamplight spilling from the house. Then they heard it, the unmistakable sound of horses approaching at a walk, their riders trying for stealth, but betrayed by the creak of leather and the soft jingle of tack. That's not coyotes, Maggie said grimly. Owen's jaw set. Amelia, get down below the window line. Don't shoot unless I tell you to. Maggie, you got the left approach covered. Got it. Wilson boys. Owen called out, his voice carrying across the yard. You see anything? Movement on the south side, Bassam, came the reply. 3, maybe 4 riders. Owen swore under his breath. They're trying to surround us. Smart. Probably been watching for days, waiting for their moment. What do? Amelia asked, her voice steadier than she felt. We show them we're not easy prey. Owen raised his voice, projecting it into the darkness. This is private property. You're trespassing. Identify yourselves or clear out. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice called back, one that made ice form in Amelia's veins because she recognized it. Clayton Harding, the outlaw leader, his tone carrying mocking amusement. Now, that's not very friendly. Mr. Zachariah, here we are just wanting to have a conversation, and you're threatening us with violence. You're not here for conversation, Owen shouted back. You're here for the woman. Well, you can't have her. She's under my protection, and I don't take that responsibility lightly. Protection? Harding laughed, the sound ugly in the darkness. You call this protection, buying a woman like she's a piece of property? We heard all about it. The whole territory's talking about the fool cowboy who paid $100 for used goods. Amelia flinched at the crude language, but Owen's expression never changed. Say what you want, doesn't change the facts. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and trespassing on land where you're not welcome. Leave now and we'll let you go. Stay and we'll defend what's ours. Outnumbered. Harding's voice took on a dangerous edge. I count 6 guns here, Zachariah. How many you got? 3, 4. The math doesn't favor you. The math doesn't account for the fact that we're dug in with clear sight lines while you're exposed in an open yard, Owen replied calmly. Or that Marshal Hartley and a full posse know exactly where you are. They're a day behind you at most. You really want to waste time here when you should be running for the border. There was a pause, and Amelia could almost hear Harding calculating odds, weighing risks. When he spoke again, his tone had lost some of its mocking quality. All we want is the woman Zachariah. She talked to the marshal, described us to the law. That's a problem we need to solve. You give her to us, we'll be on our way. You and your friends can live to see another sunrise. No deal, Owen said flatly. And if you think I'm handing over an innocent woman to the men who murdered her fellow passengers, you don't know me at all. Then you're a fool, Harding spat. And you're going to die for nothing for a woman who isn't even yours, who'll probably leave you first chance she gets anyway. Maybe so, Owen agreed. But I'll die knowing I stood for something. Can you say the same? The challenge hung in the air, and for a moment Amelia thought it might actually work, that Harding might decide the risk wasn't worth it and ride away. But then his voice came again, harder now, stripped of pretense. Wrong answer, Cowboy. Boys, light 'em up. The night exploded into chaos. Muzzle flashes erupted from multiple positions, bullets smashing into the adobe walls and splintering the wooden shutters Owen had reinforced. He returned fire immediately, his rifle barking in measured rhythm, each shot deliberate and aimed. Maggie was shooting too, her old hunting rifle booming like thunder. From the barn, the Wilson boys added their firepower, laying down a crossfire that forced the attackers to scatter. Amelia, the left window, Owen shouted, levering another round into his rifle. Someone's trying to flank us. She moved on instinct, fear giving way to the training Owen had drilled into her. Through the window, she could see a shadowy figure running low across the yard, heading for the corner of the house where he'd have a clear shot at anyone inside. Her hands were steady as she raised the revolver sighted like Owen had taught her and squeezed the trigger. The man went down with a cry, clutching his leg. Not a killing shot, but enough to take him out of the fight. Amelia felt a surge of grim satisfaction mixed with nausea. She'd actually shot someone, hurt another human being. There was no time to process the feeling because more gunfire erupted from a new direction, forcing her to duck as bullets whined overhead. They're trying to circle behind the barn, Maggie yelled. Owen, the boys are exposed. Owen swore and moved to the back window, firing rapidly at targets Amelia couldn't see. The smell of gunpowder filled the house, acrid and choking. Her ears rang from the constant explosions. This was nothing like the practice sessions, nothing like shooting at bottles and tin cans. This was violent and terrifying and utterly real. Harding, Owen called out during a brief lull in the gunfire. You've got one man down already. How many more you want to lose before you admit this isn't worth it? Worth it! Harding's voice was thick with rage now. You shot my brother, you son of a... The obscenity was drowned out by renewed gunfire more intense than before. These weren't warning shots anymore. These were kill shots aimed with lethal intent. A bullet crashed through the window above Amelia's head, showering her with broken glass. She heard one of the Wilson boys cry out from the barn, followed by his brother shouting in alarm. Tommy's hit, the older Wilson boy called. Not bad, but he's bleeding. Owen's face was grim in the lamplight. Can he still shoot? Yeah. Then keep firing. Don't give them an inch. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 30 minutes. Amelia lost track of how many shots she fired, how many times she had to reload with shaking hands. At some point, Maggie took a grazing shot to the arm, but kept fighting, binding the wound with a strip of cloth torn from her shirt and returning to her position without complaint.
This story was
suddenly as it
posted on the
started,
channel
the
west
gunfire
of
stopped.
Betrayal.
From
Please
the
do not
ringing silence
repost
that
it in any
followed,
form.
They heard the sound of horses galloping away into the night, heading south toward Mexico at a desperate pace. Owen waited a full minute before moving from the window, his rifle still at the ready. Stay down, he ordered. Could be a trick. But as the minutes stretched on with no renewed attack, it became clear the Hardings had retreated. Owen finally lowered his rifle and turned to check on Maggie and Amelia, his face drawn with exhaustion. Everyone all right? We're fine, Maggie reported, though her arm was bleeding steadily through the makeshift bandage. Nothing that won't heal. Amelia, I'm okay. she said, surprised to find it was true. She was shaking now, the adrenaline fading and leaving her weak kneed, but she was unhurt. I shot someone, Owen. I actually shot a person. I know. He crossed to her and pulled her into a brief, fierce embrace that was over almost before it began. You did what you had to do. You protected yourself and us. That's nothing to be ashamed of. But no buts. You faced real danger, and you didn't freeze. That takes courage, Amelia. Real courage. From the barn, the Wilson boys emerged supporting the wounded Tommy between them. The injury looked painful, but not life-threatening. A bullet had carved a furrow across his shoulder, bloody but clean. Owen immediately went to help them, his medical training from his army days kicking in as he examined the wound. You'll live, he told the young man. Bullet went straight through the meat. We'll get you cleaned up and bandaged proper. You did good out there, both of you. As dawn began to paint the eastern sky in shades of pink and gold, they surveyed the damage. The yard was littered with spent shell casings. The house bore multiple bullet holes, the shutters were splintered, and one window was completely shattered. And near the fence line they found two bodies, Harding's wounded brother who'd bled out during the retreat, and another gang member who'd taken a lucky shot to the chest. The marshal will want to see this, Owen said, his voice flat. Proof that they attacked us, that this was self-defense. But Amelia was barely listening. She stood on the porch, watching the sunrise, her revolver still in her hand, and felt something fundamental shift inside her. She'd faced death again, but this time she hadn't been helpless. This time she'd fought back. This time she'd protected people she cared about. And she realized with startling clarity that she didn't want to leave this place. Didn't want to return to Boston's safe parlors or even San Francisco's refined academy. She wanted to stay here in this hard land with these strong people building something real. Owen, she said quietly as he came to stand beside her. Can we talk? He looked at her, something uncertain in his eyes, as if he feared what she might say. Of course. I've made my decision, she continued, turning to face him fully. About San Francisco, about what comes next. And I think you should know before the marshal arrives, before everything gets complicated again. All right, he said carefully. What have you decided? Amelia took a deep breath, committing herself to words that would change everything. I want to stay, here on the ranch, if you'll have me. Not as someone you saved or someone you feel responsible for, but as, she struggled for the right words, as your partner, in whatever form that takes. Owen stared at her, his expression unreadable. Amelia, you don't have to. I'm not saying this out of obligation, she interrupted. I'm saying it because in the past 2 weeks I've learned more about who I really am than in 22 years in Boston. I'm stronger than I thought, braver than I imagined. And I'm happiest when I'm here working beside you and Maggie, building something that matters. I don't want to go back to teaching girls how to embroider and pour tea. I want to teach them how to shoot straight and stand their ground. A smile tugged at Owen's lips, the first genuine smile she'd seen since the attack began. You're serious? Completely. And San Francisco, your father. I'll write to them both, explain that I found a different path. My father will worry, but he'll understand eventually. And the academy can find another teacher. But Owen, she reached out and took his hand. I can't find another you. Another place where I feel like I finally belong. So, yes, I'm serious. If you'll have me, I want to stay. For a moment he said nothing, just looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Then he pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her with a fierce protectiveness that had nothing to do with duty and everything to do with feeling. I'll have you, he said quietly against her hair, for as long as you want to stay. And as the sun rose over the Arizona desert, painting everything in shades of gold and promise, Amelia Prescott finally understood what freedom truly meant. Not escape from danger, but the courage to face it. Not safety in familiar places, but the strength to make a home in harsh ones. Not the comfort of following someone else's path, but the terrifying, exhilarating choice to forge her own. She had been sold and bleeding, looking down in shame, but now she stood tall, looking toward a future she would build with her own hands, protected not by walls or distance, but by people who'd become family by love that had grown in the most unlikely soil. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.
Marshal Hartley arrived 6 hours after the sun had fully risen, riding hard with a posse of 8 men behind him. The dust cloud they kicked up was visible for miles, and by the time they thundered into the yard, Owen had already dragged the 2 bodies into the shade of the barn and wrapped them in canvas. The sight of the marshal's grim face told them everything they needed to know, even before he dismounted. "We lost them," Hartley said without preamble, accepting the water canteen Owen offered. "Had them cornered in Copper Springs, but they slipped through during the night, found their trail heading south, and followed it here." His eyes took in the bullet-scarred house, the shattered window, the blood-stained dirt. "Looks like they found you first." "About 3 in the morning," Owen confirmed. 6 of them, led by Clayton Harding. They wanted Amelia. We persuaded them otherwise. Hartley walked to where the bodies lay and pulled back the canvas, studying the dead men's faces.
"That's Silas Harding Clayton's brother, and this one's Pete Gorman, rode with them for years." He looked up at Owen with something approaching respect. "You killed 2 of the most wanted men in the territory. The others ran for Mexico after we wounded at least 1 more. They'll be across the border by now if they're smart." "They're smart," Hartley said grimly. "That's what makes them so dangerous. But with Silas dead, Clayton's lost his right hand. The gang won't recover from this, not easily." He turned to where Amelia stood on the porch, still wearing the borrowed trousers and the revolver at her hip. "Miss Prescott, you hurt. No Marshall. Thanks to Owen and Maggie and the Wilson boys, we all survived." "I heard shots from inside the house," Hartley said, his tone careful. "You do any of that shooting yourself?" Amelia's hand moved unconsciously to the revolver. "I wounded one of them, the man who was trying to flank us. Owen taught me well." Something flickered in Hartley's expression, approval mixed with concern. "That's not something most Eastern ladies can say. You've changed since I saw you last." "The territory has a way of changing people," Amelia replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "Sometimes for the better." Hartley nodded slowly, then gestured to his men. "Boys, check the perimeter. Make sure there's no stragglers hiding in the brush. Document everything for my report. And someone ride to Promise Creek, get the undertaker out here for these bodies." As his posse dispersed, he turned back to Owen. "I need your statement and Miss Prescott's. Everything that happened start to finish. This was justifiable defense, but we need it documented proper." They spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of the attack, while one of Hartley's deputies took notes. The Wilson boys gave their account, their father having ridden over as soon as word reached him, his face tight with worry that relaxed only when he saw both his sons alive and relatively whole. Maggie described the shootout with the practical precision of someone who'd lived through range wars, her bandaged arm the only sign of how close they'd all come to disaster. When it was Amelia's turn, she recounted the night with surprising calm, describing the terror and the training that had fought each other in her mind until training won. Hartley listened without interruption, his weathered face unreadable until she finished with her decision to shoot the man flanking their position. "You saved lives last night," he said quietly. "Owen's, Maggie's, maybe your own. That man you hit was carrying enough ammunition to keep firing for an hour. If he'd gotten into position, this could have gone very differently." The words should have made her feel better, but instead they just made her tired. She'd shot a human being, possibly killed him for all she knew, since the Hardings had dragged him away during their retreat. The necessity of it didn't erase the weight of it, the knowledge that she'd crossed a line she could never uncross. "Will there be charges?" Owen asked, his voice protective. "Against any of us." "Charges." Hartley looked genuinely surprised. "For defending your home against a gang of murderers and kidnappers? Hell, no, pardon my language. If
This
anything
story
you've
was
done
posted on the
territorial
channel
service.
west of Betrayal.
The governor's had a
Please
bounty
do
on
not
the Hardings
repost
for
it
2 years.
in any form.
You'll be getting reward money once I file the paperwork." "We don't want their money," Owen said flatly. "Speak for yourself," Maggie interjected. "That reward could buy a lot of supplies, fix the damage to the house, maybe even expand the herd. Nothing wrong with accepting payment for a job well done." Owen looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Maggie's expression stopped him. "We'll discuss it later," he conceded. Hartley finished his coffee and stood, his joints creaking audibly. "I'm leaving 2 deputies here for the next week, just in case Clayton doubles back for revenge. I don't think he will. He's wounded down to maybe 3 men, and he knows we'll be watching for him.
Better safe than sorry. Appreciated, Owen said, shaking the marshal's hand. John, one more thing, about Miss Prescott's situation. What about it? Owen glanced at Amelia, something unspoken passing between them. She's decided to stay, here on the ranch. Not as a guest or someone under protection, but as... He hesitated clearly, uncertain how to phrase it. As his partner, Amelia finished firmly. In every sense of the word. Hartley's eyebrows rose, but he recovered quickly. Well now, that's unexpected. Miss Prescott. Are you certain? No offense to Owen, but ranch life is hard even for women born to it, for someone from your background. My background didn't prepare me for being kidnapped and sold either, Amelia interrupted. But I survived that. I think I can handle cattle and chickens. A smile tugged at Hartley's mouth. I suspect you can at that. Owen, you sure about this? Taking on a partner's a big responsibility. So's saving someone's life, Owen replied. I figure if I'm already responsible for her safety, might as well make it official. Official how? Hartley's tone was carefully neutral, but his eyes were sharp. Owen's jaw tightened, and Amelia saw him gather his courage like a man preparing to jump off a cliff. I'd like permission to marry her if she'll have me. I know it's fast, I know people will talk, but Marshall, I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The words hung in the air, and Amelia felt her heart stutter in her chest. They talked about her staying about being partners, but marriage. That was something else entirely. Something permanent and binding and real, in ways that made her both terrified and exhilarated. Hartley looked between them, his expression thoughtful. Miss Prescott, this what you want? Because I need to hear you say it clearly. Too many women out here get pressured into marriages they don't want, and I won't be party to that. Amelia took a deep breath, aware that every person in the yard was watching her, waiting for her answer. 2 weeks ago, she'd been a refined Boston schoolteacher with a plan for her life. Now she was standing in the Arizona desert, wearing men's clothes and a gun, being asked if she wanted to marry a cowboy she'd known for barely more than a fortnight. The sensible answer was no. The rational choice was to thank Owen for his protection, take the money her father had sent, and continue to San Francisco as originally planned. That was what any reasonable person would do. But Amelia had learned in the hardest way possible that reason and survival weren't always the same thing. Yes, she said clearly. Yes, I want to marry him. Not because I feel obligated, not because I'm afraid, but because in 2 weeks, Owen Zachariah has shown me more respect and kindness than I received in 22 years in Boston. Because he taught me to be strong instead of keeping me weak. Because when I look at him, I see a future I actually want instead of one I'm supposed to want. Owen's expression transformed hope and relief, and something deeper flooding his features. He crossed to her in 3 long strides and took her hands in his calloused palms warm against her work-roughened skin. You sure? He asked quietly for her ears alone. Because there's no taking it back once it's done. You'd be Mrs. Owen Zachariah, wife of a broke rancher in the middle of nowhere. It's not an easy life, Amelia. It's not what you were raised for. I wasn't raised for any of this, she replied, squeezing his hands. But it turns out I'm good at things I was never supposed to do. So yes, Owen, I'm sure. Hartley cleared his throat, breaking the moment. Well then, I can't perform the ceremony myself, but there's a circuit preacher due in Promise Creek next Sunday. A man named Reverend Walsh comes through once a month. If you're serious about this, I can arrange for him to stay an extra day, perform the wedding here at the ranch. That'd be appreciated, Owen said, still looking at Amelia like he couldn't quite believe what was happening. 1 week then, Hartley said. Gives you time to be absolutely certain, gives Miss Prescott time to write those letters she needs to write. Her father deserves to know before it's done, even if he can't be here to give his blessing. The mention of her father sent a pang through Amelia's chest. He'd wanted her to come home to be safe under his protection. Instead, she was choosing to marry a man he'd never met to stay in a place he'd never seen. It would break his heart, but she hoped eventually he'd understand. I'll write to him today, she promised, and to the academy. They deserve to know I won't be coming. After Hartley and his men departed, leaving 2 young deputies to stand watch, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Amelia and Owen stood in the yard, the morning sun climbing higher, both of them a bit dazed by the speed at which their lives had just changed. "We're getting married," Amelia said wonderingly. "In a week." "We are," Owen confirmed. "Unless you change your mind." "I won't." "You might. It's allowed." But his smile suggested he didn't really believe she would. Maggie appeared on the porch, her bandaged arm in a makeshift sling, her expression somewhere between exasperated and delighted. "Well, you two certainly don't do anything by halves, do you? Shot up by outlaws one night, engaged the next morning." "Is it crazy?" Amelia asked, needing to hear Maggie's honest opinion. "Completely," Maggie said cheerfully. "But the best things in life usually are. Now come inside, both of you. We've got a week to plan a wedding, and that doesn't give me much time to make you a proper dress." "I can wear what I have?" Amelia protested, but Maggie was already shaking her head. "You'll wear a dress I make, or you'll wear nothing at all, and since the latter isn't appropriate for a wedding, we're making a dress. I've got fabric stored away that I was saving for something special. Can't think of anything more special than this." The next week passed in a blur of activity. While Owen and the deputies repaired the damage to the house, replaced the shattered window, and patched the bullet holes in the adobe walls, Maggie and Amelia worked on the wedding dress. It was a simple design, nothing like the elaborate gowns Amelia had seen in Boston, but Maggie's skilled hands transformed the cream-colored fabric into something beautiful, fitted at the bodice, flowing at the skirt, with delicate embroidery at the collar that Maggie stayed up late to complete. "Belonged to my mother," Maggie explained as she worked the needle. "This embroidery pattern. She taught me when I was a girl back in Missouri. Never thought I'd use it again after my own wedding, but here we are." "Thank you," Amelia said, emotion thick in her throat. "For everything. For taking me in, for teaching me, for treating me like family." "You are family," Maggie said firmly. "Have been since the day Owen brought you through that door. This just makes it official." Amelia wrote 3 letters that week. The first to her father was the hardest, explaining her decision to marry Owen instead of returning home or continuing to San Francisco. She tried to convey what these weeks had meant, how they'd changed her, but words felt inadequate for the transformation she'd undergone. She could only hope he'd read between the lines and understand that this wasn't rebellion or rashness, but a choice made by a woman who finally knew her own mind. The second letter went to the San Francisco Ladies Academy, apologizing for the change in plans and recommending several qualified candidates from her class at Hartford who could fill the position. It was businesslike and professional, closing a door she'd once desperately wanted to walk through. The third letter was to her best friend from Boston, Elizabeth Morris, who had always encouraged Amelia's independent streak even when it scandalized their social circle. This letter was longer, more honest, describing everything that had happened and the man she'd chosen to marry. She asked Elizabeth to explain things to their mutual friends to help smooth over the scandal that would inevitably follow. "Do you think they'll understand?" she asked Owen one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in impossible colors. "My father, my friends. Some will, some won't," Owen said honestly. "People back east have their own ideas about how life should be lived. They might not understand choosing this," he gestured to the desert around them, "over what they think of as civilization." "But it is civilization," as Amelia said. "Just a different kind. Building something from nothing, making a life through honest work, helping your neighbors survive. That's more civilized than all the tea parties and calling cards in Boston." Owen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. "You really believe that?" "I do now. I didn't 2 weeks ago, but I do now." The Wilson family visited twice that week, bringing supplies and offers of help. Mrs. Wilson, a sturdy woman with kind eyes and work-hardened hands, took Amelia aside during their second visit. "You sure about this, honey?" she asked gently. "Marriage
This story
is hard
was
enough when
posted
you've
on the
known
channel
someone
west
for
of
years.
Betrayal.
Marrying
Please
a
do not
man after
repost
2 weeks,
it in any
that's
form.
insane," Amelia suggested with a slight smile. "I was going to say brave." Mrs. Wilson studied her carefully. "But I can see it in the way you look at him, the way he looks at you. My Tom and I, we courted proper for 2 years before we married. Thought we knew everything about each other. Turns out living together teaches you things no courtship ever could. You'll learn Owen's faults soon enough, and he'll learn yours. That doesn't scare you." "Of course it does. But fear's not a reason to say no to happiness.
Just means you go in with your eyes open. She patted Amelia's hand. You've got a good man there. Owen Zachariah's got his demons like we all do, but he's honest and hardworking, and he'll never raise his hand to you in anger. That's more than a lot of women out here can say about their husbands. The words were both comforting and sobering. Amelia was choosing a life, not just a wedding. The reality of it settled over her like a weight, not oppressive, but substantial, demanding acknowledgement. On Saturday, the day before the wedding, Owen took her riding. They'd saddled Rosie, the gentle mare, and Owen had finally allowed Amelia to ride alone rather than behind him. Her seat was still uncertain, her hands awkward on the reins, but she managed to stay mounted as they rode to a small rise overlooking the ranch. Wanted to show you something, Owen said, dismounting and helping her down. Before tomorrow, before everything changes. He led her to the top of the rise where a simple wooden cross stood weathered and worn by desert winds. Catherine Zachariah was carved into the crosspiece along with the dates of her too short life. This is Catherine, Owen said quietly. My wife. Thought you should meet her in a way. Amelia's throat tightened. Owen, you don't have to. Yes, I do. He stood before the grave hat in hand, his expression distant with memory. I loved her, Amelia, loved her deeply, and when she died, I thought that was it for me. Thought I'd used up my one chance at happiness, and the rest was just surviving. I understand if part of you still... Let me finish, Owen said gently. What I felt for Catherine was real and good, and I'll always carry it with me. But what I feel for you isn't a betrayal of that. It's different, built on different foundations. Catherine and I, we were young and hopeful, building dreams. You and I, we've both seen how brutal life can be. We're building something tougher, something that can survive storms. He turned to face Amelia fully. Tomorrow when I marry you, I'm not trying to replace what I had. I'm choosing something new, and I need you to know that, to believe it. You're not second best or a substitute. You're Amelia, and that's exactly who I want. Tears spilled down Amelia's cheeks, but she didn't bother wiping them away. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I'm not strong enough for this life? What if I fail you? You won't. Owen's certainty was absolute. You've already proven you're stronger than you think. You survived things that would have broken most people. You learned to shoot to work to defend yourself and others. You've got more courage in your little finger than most people have in their whole body. But what if... Owen silenced her with a kiss, his lips gentle but sure against hers. It was their first real kiss, and it carried the weight of everything unspoken between them, promise and hope and fear and determination all mixed together. When they finally pulled apart, Owen rested his forehead against hers. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. That's what marriage means. Not that everything will be perfect, but that you don't face the imperfect alone. They stood there for a long moment, the desert wind playing around them before making their way back to the horses. As they rode home, Amelia looked back once at the lonely grave on the hill and made a silent promise to the woman buried there. I'll take care of him. I'll make him happy. I'll honor what you started by building something strong enough to last. That night, Maggie insisted on traditional separation. You'll sleep in your room, Owen in his. Bad luck to see each other before the ceremony. That's superstition, Owen protested. It's tradition, Maggie corrected. And we're following it. Now go on, both of you. Tomorrow's a big day and you need rest. But Amelia couldn't sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to Maggie's gentle snoring from the cot, and let her mind wander over everything that had happened. 3 weeks ago, she'd been on a stagecoach heading west with clear plans and confident expectations. Then violence had shattered everything, leaving her broken and lost. But from that breaking, something stronger had emerged. She'd discovered reserves of courage she hadn't known she possessed. She'd learned skills her refined education had deemed unnecessary. She'd found people who valued her for who she was, not who society said she should be. And she'd found Owen quiet, steady. Owen, who'd stepped out of a crowd to save her, who'd taught her to defend herself instead of keeping her dependent, who'd offered her freedom even when it meant losing her. Tomorrow she'd marry him. Tomorrow she'd become Amelia Zachariah, wife of a frontier rancher partner in building a life from dust and determination. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it filled her with a sense of rightness she'd never felt about any other choice in her life. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the sky an impossible blue that seemed to stretch forever. Maggie woke Amelia before sunrise excitement, overriding her usual practical demeanor. Come on up with you. We've got to get you bathed and dressed. Reverend Walsh will be here by noon, and we want you looking perfect. The morning passed in a flurry of activity. Maggie heated water for a proper bath, washed and braided Amelia's hair into an elaborate style she'd never have managed on her own, and helped her into the cream-colored dress that fit as if it had been made for her body specifically. "You look beautiful," Maggie said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Like a proper bride." Amelia studied herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman looking back. She'd lost weight during her ordeal, gained it back through hard work and Maggie's cooking. Her skin was darker now, touched by the desert sun despite her efforts to stay covered. Her hands showed the evidence of labor, strong and capable where they'd once been soft. But her eyes were what struck her most. They held a confidence, a knowing that hadn't been there 3 weeks ago. "I look different," she said wonderingly. "You look like yourself," Maggie corrected, "maybe for the first time in your life." A knock on the door announced the arrival of guests. The Wilson family had come, bringing half the neighboring ranches with them. Word had spread quickly about the wedding, and frontier hospitality demanded their presence. They crowded into the main room and spilled out into the yard. Maybe 20 people total, all come to witness Owen Zachariah take a bride. Reverend Walsh was a tall, thin man with a booming voice that seemed incongruous with his spare frame. He'd set up in front of the fireplace, the very spot where Owen had burned the bill of sale that had once claimed ownership of Amelia's person. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. "It's time," Maggie said, squeezing Amelia's hand. "You ready?" Amelia took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm ready." She stepped out of the bedroom, and the gathered crowd turned to look. But Amelia only had eyes for Owen, who stood before the Reverend in his best clothes, a black suit that had clearly seen better days but was clean, and pressed his hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. When his eyes met hers, the expression there took her breath away. Wonder and gratitude and love all mixed together in a look that said more than words ever could. Maggie walked beside her, serving as father and escort, both delivering her to Owen's side with a whispered, "You take care of her, Owen Zachariah, or you'll answer to me." "Yes, ma'am," Owen replied, never taking his eyes off Amelia. Reverend Walsh opened his Bible, his voice filling the small house. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the joining of this man and this woman in holy matrimony. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but with full knowledge of its sacred nature." The familiar words washed over Amelia, but she was focused on Owen's hands holding hers strong and steady, anchoring her to this moment. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected, silence reigned. When he asked Owen if he took this woman, the answer came without hesitation. "I do, for as long as we both shall live." Then it was her turn, and Amelia heard her own voice clear and certain. "I do, for as long as we both shall live." Owen produced a simple gold band, slightly worn, that had been his mother's. It slipped onto Amelia's finger as if it had been made for her, a circle of promise and permanence. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Arizona and the Lord Almighty, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Owen, you may kiss your bride." And he did gently at first, then with more feeling, sealing their vows with a kiss that drew cheers from the gathered witnesses. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless Reverend Walsh grinned. "Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Mr. and Mrs. Owen Zachariah." The celebration that followed was simple but joyful. The Wilson women had brought food, and someone produced a fiddle, and for a few hours the hard realities of frontier life were forgotten in favor of music and laughter. Amelia danced with Owen, his arms around her, feeling both strange and perfectly right then, with Mr. Wilson and several other neighbors who wanted to welcome her properly to their community. "You've got yourself a good man," Mrs. Wilson told her during a break in the dancing, "and from what I hear, he's got himself a good woman. That business with the Hardings standing your ground like
This story was posted
that
on the
took real
channel
courage.
west of Betrayal.
I was
Please do not
terrified,"
repost
Amelia
it in
admitted.
any form.
Courage isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. You'll fit in fine out here, Mrs. Zachariah. Mrs. Zachariah. The name still felt foreign, but Amelia was determined to grow into it. As the sun began to set and the guests prepared to depart, Marshal Hartley pulled Owen aside. Amelia, standing nearby, couldn't help but overhear. "Got word this morning," Hartley said quietly.
Clayton Harding was spotted crossing into Mexico 3 days ago. He's gone, Owen. Probably for good. He lost his brother, lost most of his gang, and the Mexican authorities know to watch for him. He won't be troubling you or your wife again. Owen's shoulders relaxed incrementally. You're sure? As sure as I can be about anything in this territory. The threat's over. Hartley glanced at Amelia and raised his voice slightly. Mrs. Zachariah, you can rest easy. Your testimony and what happened here broke the Harding gang for good. You did the territory a service. We all did, Amelia corrected. Together. After the last guest had departed and Maggie had tactfully announced she'd be spending the night at her own ranch for the first time in weeks, Amelia and Owen found themselves alone. Truly alone for the first time since he'd bought her freedom in Promise Creek. They stood in the main room, suddenly awkward with each other now that the formalities were done and reality was setting in. They were married, husband and wife, partners in life and work, and everything that entailed. I should confess something, Owen said, finally breaking the silence. I'm nervous. Been married before, but this feels different, more important somehow. I'm terrified, Amelia admitted. I've never been with a man, never been anyone's wife. What if I don't know how to... Owen crossed to her and took her hands gently. We'll figure it out together. There's no rush, no expectations. We've got the rest of our lives to learn each other. The tenderness in his voice steadied her. This was Owen who'd saved her life, who'd taught her to be strong, who'd chosen her even when it would have been easier to send her away. She trusted him with her life. She could trust him with her heart. Show me, she whispered. Show me what comes next. And he did, leading her to the bedroom with gentle patience, showing her with touches and whispers that love could be tender instead of terrifying, that vulnerability could be strength instead of weakness. The night passed in discoveries both physical and emotional in learning the geography of each other's bodies and hearts. When dawn broke, painting the room in soft gold light, they lay tangled together in sheets that smelled of lavender and possibility. Amelia traced the scar on Owen's jaw with one finger, marveling at how much had changed since she'd first seen him standing in that crowd in Promise Creek. What are you thinking? Owen asked, his voice still rough with sleep. I'm thinking about Mrs. Henley, Amelia said quietly, and the couple from Philadelphia, how they died while I lived. It doesn't seem fair. It's not fair, Owen agreed. But Amelia, you can honor their memory by living fully, by building something good from the tragedy. That's what they'd want. How do you know? Because it's what I'd want if our positions were reversed. No one who loves you wants your grief to trap you. They want your joy to set you free. The wisdom in his words settled over her like a benediction. He was right. She could carry the weight of survival as guilt, or she could carry it as responsibility to live well, to love deeply, to make something meaningful from the second chance she'd been given. I love you, she said the words, feeling both momentous and natural. I know it's fast. I know people will say it's too soon to really know, but Owen, I love you. His arms tightened around her. I love you too. Have since the moment you stood on that porch in borrowed clothes, determined to learn to shoot, despite being afraid. You're the strongest person I know, Amelia Zachariah. Amelia Zachariah. The name felt right now, felt earned. She was no longer Amelia Prescott of Boston, daughter of privilege and refinement. She was Amelia Zachariah of the Arizona Territory, wife of a rancher survivor of violence, defender of home and family. What do we do now? She asked. Now. Owen smiled and kissed her forehead. Now we get up, have breakfast, and start our life together. I've got a fence that needs mending in the north pasture. You've got that mare to train if you're still interested in learning to ride proper. Maggie will be back by noon with about 1,000 questions about the wedding night that you're under no obligation to answer. Amelia laughed, the sound surprising her with its genuine joy. That sounds perfect. Ordinary and perfect. That's what life is, Owen said. Mostly ordinary days strung together with just enough extraordinary moments to remind you why the ordinary matters. They rose and dressed Amelia in her practical work clothes and Owen in his worn ranch gear. Together they made breakfast, moving around each other in the small kitchen with the awkwardness of newlyweds learning to share space. The coffee was too strong, the eggs slightly overdone, but it was theirs, their breakfast, their home, their life. After they ate, Owen led her outside to where the morning sun was turning the desert gold. The ranch spread before them, modest but sturdy, a testament to hard work and determination. "This is ours now," Owen said, his arm around her waist. "Everything you see. Not much compared to what you had in Boston, I know." "It's everything," Amelia interrupted fiercely. "It's more than everything. It's real and honest and built by actual work. That matters more than all the mansions in Boston." Owen pulled her close, and they stood together watching the day unfold. In the distance, they could see Maggie's small ranch, and beyond that, the shapes of the Wilson spread. Their neighbors, their community, their support in the hard times that would inevitably come. "We're going to have a good life," Owen said quietly. "Won't always be easy, but it'll be good." "I know," Amelia replied, leaning into his solid warmth. "We'll make sure of it." And as the Arizona sun climbed higher, beginning another day of heat and work and simple survival, Amelia felt something settle deep in her soul. Peace, she realized. For the first time in her entire life, she felt completely at peace with who she was and where she belonged. She'd been sold and bleeding full of shame and despair. But she'd found her way through darkness to light through violence, to love through helplessness, to strength. She'd found Owen, who'd declared her his to protect, and then spent every day proving that protection meant empowerment, not possession. She'd found Maggie and the Wilsons, and an entire community of people who measured worth by character rather than pedigree. And most importantly, she'd found herself the woman she was always meant to be, strong and capable and unafraid. The future stretched before her, uncertain as all futures are, but she would face it with Owen by her side and courage in her heart. Together they would build something lasting from the dust and difficulty of the desert. Together they would create a home where love meant freedom and strength meant vulnerability and survival meant choosing joy even in the midst of hardship. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything she'd never known she wanted. Everything she'd needed without realizing it. And as she turned to Owen, seeing her own hopes reflected in his eyes, Amelia knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. This was home. This was love. This was the beginning of everything that mattered. The months that followed the wedding passed with a rhythm that surprised Amelia with its deep satisfaction. Summer's brutal heat gave way to autumn's more forgiving temperatures, and with the change of seasons came changes to the ranch itself. The reward money from the territorial governor arrived in September, $2,000 split between Owen, Maggie, and the Wilson boys for their role in stopping the Harding gang. Owen had been reluctant to accept it, but Maggie's practical wisdom won out. "This money represents justice," she'd said firmly. "Those men took lives, ruined families. Accepting payment for stopping them isn't mercenary. It's acknowledgement that good work deserves compensation. Now stop being stubborn and cash the draft." They used the funds carefully. Owen repaired the barn's aging roof, replaced worn-out tools, and purchased 3 additional head of cattle to expand the herd. Amelia insisted on setting aside a portion for the schoolhouse she was determined to build. The idea had come to her one evening while helping young Tommy Wilson with his letters. The boy could barely read despite being 14, and none of the ranch children had access to proper education. "There's no school within 30 miles, she'd told Owen, her voice passionate with purpose. "These children deserve better. They deserve to read and write and learn mathematics. I may not be teaching in San Francisco, but that doesn't mean I've stopped being a teacher." Owen had studied her face in the lamplight, seeing the fire that education kindled in her, and nodded. "Then we'll build you a school. Nothing fancy at first, but something solid, a place where knowledge can take root." The letter from her father arrived in October, 6 weeks after she'd sent her explanation of the marriage. Amelia's hands trembled as she broke the seal, terrified of what his response might be. Owen stood nearby, a silent support, as she unfolded the pages and
This
began to
story
read.
was posted on the channel
dearest
west
Amelia,
of Betrayal. Please
Your
do not
letter arrived
repost it
yesterday,
in any form.
and I confess I have read it a dozen times, each reading bringing new emotions. Shock, certainly, my little girl married to a man I've never met, living a life I can scarcely imagine. Fear for your safety in such a harsh land. And if I am honest, hurt that you chose this path without my counsel or blessing. But beneath all those feelings, daughter, I find something else. Pride.
You have survived horrors that would have destroyed many people. You have found strength. I didn't know you possessed, though perhaps I should have, for you always had your mother's spirit stubborn and fierce beneath the refined surface we taught you to show the world. You have chosen love over security, adventure over certainty, and truth over expectation. How can a father not be proud of such courage? I wish I could have walked you down the aisle. I wish I could have met this Owen Zachariah who won your heart. But I trust your judgment, Amelia. You were always the wisest of my children, even when you were too young to know it. If you say he is a good man worthy of your love, then I believe you. I am enclosing a bank draft for $500, your dowry such as it is. Use it to build your new life. And know that while Boston will always be your home should you wish to return, I understand that home is not always a place. Sometimes it is a person, a choice, a future we build with our own hands. Write to me often. Tell me about this desert that has claimed you. Help me understand the life you've chosen so I might celebrate it rather than mourn what might have been. Your loving father, Jonathan Prescott. Tears streamed down Amelia's face as she finished reading, but they were tears of relief and joy rather than sorrow. Owen pulled her close, letting her cry against his chest while he smoothed her hair with one calloused hand. He understands, she whispered. I was so afraid he'd disown me, but he understands. You're his daughter, Owen said simply. How could he not be proud of you? The $500 became the foundation of the schoolhouse. Owen and several neighbors donated labor, and by November, they'd raised a small building at the edge of Promise Creek close enough to serve the town's children, but far enough from the saloons and rougher establishments to maintain propriety. It had 4 walls, a good roof, 12 desks built by Mr. Wilson's skilled hands, and a blackboard Owen had ordered special from Tucson. Amelia stood in her empty schoolhouse the day before it was set to open, breathing in the smell of fresh wood and chalk dust, feeling something profound settle in her chest. This was hers not given to her by family connections or social standing, but built through her own determination and the support of a community that had come to value her. You ready for this? Maggie asked from the doorway. The older woman had become more than a friend. In the past months, she was family in every way that mattered. The mother Amelia had lost years ago, and the sister she'd never had. I think so, Amelia replied, though I'm nervous. Teaching ranch children is different than teaching young ladies in Boston. They're just children, Maggie said practically. They need the same things, patience, encouragement, and someone who believes they're worth the effort. You'll do fine. The school opened on a crisp Monday morning in late November. 12 students arrived that first day, the Wilson boys. 3 daughters of a neighboring rancher, several children from Promise Creek, whose parents scraped together pennies for books and supplies. They ranged in age from 6 to 16, some barely able to write their names, others hungry for knowledge they'd never had access to. Amelia taught reading and writing in the mornings, mathematics and history in the afternoons. She kept discipline firmly but kindly, never raising her voice but making her expectations clear. The children responded with an eagerness that humbled her. These weren't bored society girls forced to learn accomplishments they'd never use. These were children who understood that education meant opportunity, that knowing how to read a contract might save your family's land, that understanding numbers could mean the difference between profit and poverty. Mrs. Zachariah. 10-year-old Sarah Wilson asked one afternoon, her face scrunched with concentration over a spelling lesson. How'd you learn all this reading and writing and such? The same way you're learning, Amelia replied. One lesson at a time, one day at a time. I was lucky enough to have teachers who cared about education. Now I get to be that teacher for you. My pa says you're the smartest lady in the territory, Sarah said with the blunt honesty of childhood. He says we're lucky you chose to stay instead of going to that fancy city. The words warmed Amelia more than the girl could know. She'd chosen to stay, and that choice had rippled outward in ways she couldn't have imagined, giving these children opportunities they wouldn't have had otherwise, strengthening the community's bonds, proving that civilization could take root even in harsh soil. Winter came to the Arizona territory with cold nights and mercifully shorter days of heat. Amelia and Owen settled into the rhythms of married life, learning each other's habits and quirks. She discovered he was nearly useless before morning coffee,
that he sang old army songs when he thought no one could hear, that he had a gift for gentling even the most stubborn horses. He learned she talked in her sleep sometimes, reliving the stagecoach attack and nightmares that came less frequently, but never fully disappeared, that she was fiercely competitive about card games, that she could spend hours lost in books when ranch work allowed. They had their first real argument in December over something trivial that spiraled into something larger. Owen had ridden to Promise Creek without telling her, concerned about reports of strangers asking questions about the Harding gang. Amelia had been frantic with worry when he returned 3 hours late, her fear transforming into anger. "You could have told me where you were going," she'd shouted, years of refined manners abandoned in favor of raw emotion. "I thought something had happened to you, I thought. I'm not some fragile thing that needs permission to leave his own ranch." Owen had shot back, his own temper finally showing. "I can take care of myself, Amelia. Been doing it for years before you came along. That's not the point. The point is we're married, we're partners, and partners tell each other things. Or am I just the woman you saved someone you feel responsible for but don't actually trust?" The question had hung in the air between them, sharp and cutting. Owen's expression had shifted from anger to something more complicated, recognition, perhaps, of a fear Amelia hadn't fully acknowledged until she'd spoken it aloud. "Is that what you think?" he'd asked quietly. "That I don't trust you. I don't know what to think when you shut me out." They'd stood there in the kitchen, the tension thick enough to choke on, until Owen had finally moved. Not away but toward her, pulling her into his arms, despite her stiff resistance. "You're right," he'd said into her hair. "I should have told you. Old habits. I spent so many years alone making decisions without having to consult anyone. But you're not just someone I saved, Amelia. You're my wife, my partner. I trust you with everything I am. I just need to remember to show it better." The fight had ended with apologies and promises to communicate more openly. But it had also revealed something important. They were building a real marriage, one that would weather disagreements and misunderstandings, not some fairy tale where conflict never existed. Christmas came quietly to the ranch. They had no money for elaborate gifts, but Amelia gave Owen a shirt she'd sewn herself, every stitch careful and even. He gave her a leather-bound journal he'd ordered from Tucson, knowing how she missed having paper for her thoughts. They spent Christmas Eve with Maggie and the Wilsons, sharing a modest feast and singing carols that echoed strangely in the desert air. "You happy?" Owen asked her that night as they prepared for bed, the question simple but weighted with real concern. Amelia considered it honestly. She thought about Boston, about the life she'd left behind, the servants, and comfort, the social calendar, and refined entertainment. Then she thought about her current life, teaching children in a rough schoolhouse, working alongside her husband to keep the ranch running, finding friendship in the most unexpected places. "Yes," she said, and meant it completely. "I'm happier than I've ever been. Are you?" "More than I thought possible," Owen admitted. "When Catherine died, I thought that was it for happiness. But you've shown me that life can surprise you, that love can come in forms you never expected." He pulled her close, his arms secure around her. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broke cowboy with more ghosts than prospects." "Thank you for seeing me as strong instead of broken," Amelia replied. "For giving me the tools to defend myself instead of keeping me helpless. For making me your partner instead of your responsibility." They kissed. Then the kind of kiss that said more than words could, and Amelia thought about how far she'd come. From the auction block to this bed, from property to partner, from victim to victor. The journey had been brutal and terrifying and transformative, and she wouldn't change a single moment of it. January brought unexpected news. Marshall Hartley rode out to the ranch on a cold morning, his expression carefully neutral, in a way that immediately put Amelia on edge. "Nothing bad," he assured them, quickly seeing their concern. "Actually, I've got interesting news. The territorial governor wants to meet you both. He's coming through Promise Creek next
This story
month as
was
part of a
posted
tour,
on the channel
and he
west of
specifically
Betrayal.
asked to speak with
Please
the
do
couple
not
who helped
repost
break up
it
the
in
Harding
any
gang.
form.
"Why?" Owen asked suspiciously. "We already gave our statements, already got the reward money. What more does he want?" "To thank you publicly," Hartley explained, "and to talk about expanding law enforcement in the territory. What happened here, civilians defending themselves, neighbors banding together, it's exactly the kind of community cooperation he wants to encourage. He thinks your story could inspire other settlements to stand up against outlaw activity." Amelia and Owen exchanged glances. The thought of being displayed as examples made them both uncomfortable, but there was also something appealing about the idea that their ordeal might help others. We'll meet with him, Amelia decided. But we're not performing Seals Marshal. We'll tell our story honestly, but we won't exaggerate it or turn it into propaganda. Hartley grinned. Wouldn't expect anything less, Mrs. Zachariah. The governor's a good man. He'll appreciate your honesty. Governor Samuel Stafford arrived in Promise Creek on a February afternoon, accompanied by an entourage of assistants and territorial officials.
He was younger than Amelia expected, perhaps 40, with shrewd eyes and the weathered look of someone who'd spent time in the frontier rather than just governing it from afar. The meeting took place in Promise Creek's newly established town hall, with half the settlement crowded in to hear what would be said. Stafford listened intently as Owen and Amelia recounted their story. The kidnapping, the auction, the attack on the ranch, the final confrontation with the Hardings. He asked pointed questions, clearly interested in the specific details that had made their defense successful. What you've demonstrated here, Stafford said when they'd finished, is that civilization in the territories doesn't have to mean imported law enforcement. It can mean communities taking responsibility for their own protection while still respecting legal process. You didn't lynch the Hardings when you had the chance. You defended yourselves, then turned the evidence over to proper authorities. That's exactly the balance we need. With respect, Governor, Amelia said, her voice carrying clearly through the crowded room, we didn't do this to make a political point. We did it because we had no choice, because evil men were trying to hurt innocent people, and we were the only ones who could stop them. I understand that, Stafford replied. But Mrs. Zachariah, whether you intended it or not, your actions have consequences beyond your personal situation. Word is spread throughout the territory about what happened here. Other settlements are forming defense committees, teaching their women to shoot, building stronger communities. You've inspired change. What kind of change? Owen asked carefully. Positive change, empowering change. Stafford leaned forward. Which is why I'd like to formalize it. I want to establish a territory-wide program training civilians in basic defense and law enforcement cooperation. And I want you two to be part of it, not full-time, but perhaps quarterly sessions where you share what you've learned. Mrs. Zachariah, your story as a woman who learned to defend herself is particularly powerful. Other women need to hear it. Amelia's mind raced. The idea of traveling the territory, teaching other women the skills Owen had taught her, sharing the hard-won lessons of survival, it appealed to something deep in her nature. But it would also mean time away from the school, from the ranch, from the life they were building. Can we discuss it? She asked. My husband and I need to talk this through together. Of course, Stafford said. I'm in the territory for another month. Send word when you've decided. That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Amelia and Owen debated the
This
governor's
story
proposal.
was posted on the
Owen
channel
was
west
skeptical
of
of
betrayal.
anything involving
Please do not
territorial
repost
politics,
it in any
worried
form.
it would consume too much of their time. Amelia was torn between the appeal of helping others and the demands of her current responsibilities. What do you want to do? Owen finally asked. Not what you think you should do, not what would be politically useful. What does your heart tell you? Amelia was quiet for a long moment. I want to help, she admitted. Not for glory or recognition, but because I remember what it felt like to be helpless. If I can help other women learn to defend themselves, to find their own strength, isn't that worth something? It's worth everything, Owen agreed. But I need you to understand what you're taking on. Teaching a few sessions might turn into being the face of this program. Your story will be told and retold, not always accurately. People will have opinions about your choices, your marriage, your life. Are you ready for that? No, Amelia said honestly. But I don't think anyone's ever really ready for the things that matter most. We just do them anyway. Owen smiled, the expression full of love and pride. Then we'll do it together. I'll come with you to these sessions, help with the practical training. We'll make it clear we're partners in this, just like we're partners in everything else. They sent word to Governor Stafford the next day, agreeing to participate in the program with the stipulation that it wouldn't interfere with the school or the ranch more than a few weeks per year. Stafford accepted their terms gratefully, and by March, plans were underway for the first training session to be held in Tucson. But before that could happen, Amelia discovered something that changed everything once again. She'd been feeling ill for weeks, attributing it to the stress of teaching and the changing seasons. When Maggie finally pulled her aside and asked pointed questions about her monthly courses, realization dawned with shocking clarity. "I think I'm pregnant," Amelia whispered the words, feeling impossible, even as she spoke them.
"Maggie, I think I'm going to have a baby." Maggie's face split into a grin wide enough to rival the desert sun. "About time I was wondering when you two would get around to making me an honorary grandmother." The doctor in Promise Creek confirmed it 2 days later. Amelia was approximately 3 months along, due to deliver in early September. She rode back to the ranch in a daze, her hand resting on her still flat stomach, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what was growing inside her. Owen was mending fence when she found him, his shirt soaked with sweat despite the moderate temperature. He looked up as she approached, and something in her expression made him drop his tools immediately. "What's wrong? Are you hurt?" "No," Amelia said, then laughed at the inadequacy of the word. "No, I'm not hurt, Owen. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." He stared at her, the information seeming to take a long moment to process. Then his face transformed joy and wonder and terror, all mixing together in an expression that made Amelia's heart squeeze. "A baby?" he repeated. "We're going to have a baby." "In September, the doctor thinks?" Owen crossed to her in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that acknowledged the precious cargo she now carried. "Are you happy?" he asked. "I know this wasn't planned, wasn't something we discussed." "I'm terrified," Amelia admitted, "and excited, and completely unprepared. But yes, Owen, I'm happy. Are you happier than I have words for?" He said, his voice thick with emotion. "A child. Our child. Amelia, I swear to you, I'll be the best father I know how to be. I'll protect both of you with everything I have." "I know you will," she said, believing it absolutely. "But Owen, this changes things. The governor's program, the training sessions." "We'll figure it out," Owen interrupted. "Maybe we do 1 session before the baby comes, see how it goes. After that, we can decide based on how you're feeling what the baby needs. There's no rule that says we have to commit to everything right now." The relief that flooded through Amelia was profound. She'd been worried he might see the pregnancy as an excuse to back out of the program entirely, to insist she stay home and focus solely on motherhood. Instead, he was treating it as one factor among many, trusting her to know her own capabilities. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not making this mean I have to give up everything else." "You're not just going to be a mother," Owen said. "You're going to be a mother who teaches, who trains others, who builds schools and communities. Our child will be lucky to have you as an example." The months that followed were a study in balancing multiple identities. Amelia continued teaching through May, her expanding waistline becoming obvious enough that the children asked innocent questions about when the baby would arrive. She and Owen traveled to Tucson in April for the first training session, where Amelia spoke to a room full of women about survival and self-defense, while Owen demonstrated practical shooting techniques. The response was overwhelming. Women thanked her with tears in their eyes, telling stories of their own close calls with violence, their own feelings of helplessness in a land that could be brutal to the unprepared. Several asked if she'd come to their settlement specifically, and Amelia found herself making tentative promises for after the baby was born. "You're good at this," Owen told her on the ride back to Promise Creek, "inspiring people, giving them hope. You've found your calling." "I've found one of them," Amelia corrected. "Teaching children is a calling. Helping women defend themselves is a calling. Being your wife is a calling, and soon being a mother will be too." She smiled, her hand on her rounded belly.
This story
Turns out
was
I'm
posted
greedy.
on the channel West
want it
of
all.
Betrayal. Please do
Then
not
we'll make sure you
repost
get it all.
in any form.
Owen promised. "Somehow we'll make it work." The school closed for summer in June, giving Amelia time to prepare for the baby's arrival. Maggie was a constant presence, sharing wisdom from her own experience raising children decades ago. The neighboring women brought gifts, tiny clothes, they'd sewn blankets. They'd knitted advice, both solicited and unsolicited, about everything from nursing to discipline. In July, a letter arrived that made Amelia weep with joy and homesickness combined. Her father was coming to visit. He'd arranged his business affairs to allow for an extended absence and would arrive in Promise Creek by mid-August in time to meet his first grandchild. He's really coming, she told Owen, reading the letter for the third time.
My father is traveling all the way from Boston to meet you to see our home to be here when the baby arrives. Are you nervous? Owen asked. About him seeing how we live? A little, Amelia admitted. Our ranch is so modest compared to what I grew up with. What if he thinks I've married beneath myself? What if— Then he'd be wrong, Owen interrupted firmly. And I think your father is smarter than that. He didn't raise a fool, Amelia. He raised a woman strong enough to survive hell and brave enough to build heaven from the ashes. He'll see that when he gets here. Jonathan Prescott arrived on a sweltering August afternoon, stepping down from the stagecoach in Promise Creek, looking exactly as Amelia remembered, tall and distinguished, his silver hair neat, despite the journey, his eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. But when those eyes found her waiting at the station with Owen beside her, they softened with emotion that made Amelia's throat tighten.
Amelia, he said, and his voice cracked on her name. She rushed into his arms as best she could, with her very pregnant belly feeling his embrace surround her with memories of childhood and safety and unconditional love. He held her for a long moment before finally releasing her to study her face. You look well, he said, surprise evident in his tone. I was prepared for hardship to have aged you, but you look positively radiant. That's pregnancy, Father, Amelia said with a smile, and happiness. I want you to meet my husband. Father, this is Owen Zachariah. Owen, this is my father, Jonathan Prescott. The two men studied each other carefully, a moment of assessment that seemed to stretch forever. Then Jonathan extended his hand and Owen shook it firmly. Mr. Prescott, thank you for coming all this way. I know it wasn't an easy journey. It was necessary, Jonathan replied. When a man's daughter marries without his knowledge, the least he can do is meet the fellow who won her heart. His tone was neutral, giving nothing away. The ride back to the ranch was tense with unspoken evaluation. Jonathan's eyes took in everything: the rough landscape, the modest homestead, the simple furnishings of the house. Amelia watched him anxiously, trying to see it through his eyes, wondering what he thought of the life she'd chosen. That evening, after supper cooked from vegetables Amelia had grown herself and beef Owen had raised with his own hands, Jonathan asked to speak with Owen privately. Amelia watched them walk out to the porch, her stomach churning with anxiety that had nothing to do with the baby. Your father seems like a good man, Maggie said, appearing at her elbow with tea. Stop worrying. What if he tries to convince Owen to let me return to Boston? What if he offers money to buy me back, in a sense? Then Owen will tell him no, because you're not property to be bought and sold, Maggie said practically, and you'll tell your father that you've already chosen. Now drink this tea and stop fretting. It's not good for the baby. On the porch, Jonathan and Owen
This story
stood
was
looking out at
posted
the
on the
desert
channel
sunset,
west of
both
Betrayal.
men silent
Please do
for a
not
long
repost
moment.
it in any form.
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Zachariah, Jonathan finally said. When I received Amelia's letter explaining that she'd married you, my first instinct was to come out here and bring her home by force if necessary. I thought she'd been coerced or was suffering from some kind of trauma response that made her confuse gratitude with love. Owen's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. And now I've seen how she looks at you. I've seen the confidence in her bearing the strength in her voice. I've seen this life you've built together, modest but honest, hard but meaningful. Jonathan turned to face Owen directly. My daughter was always intelligent, always capable, but Boston society taught her to hide that behind pretty manners and acceptable accomplishments. You've let her be fully herself. That's a gift I could never give her, try as I might. She gave me just as much, Owen said quietly. More, maybe. She reminded me that life after loss is possible, that opening your heart after it's been broken doesn't make you weak. Do you love her? The question was direct, demanding honesty. More than I can express, sir. More than I thought possible to love anyone. And the baby? Are you ready to be a father? No, Owen admitted. I'm terrified I'll fail, that I won't know how to raise a child properly. But I'm going to try with everything I have. That child will know it's loved, know it's wanted, know it has a father who'll move heaven and earth to protect it. Jonathan nodded slowly. That's all anyone can ask, Mr. Zachariah Owen. I may not have been present to give my blessing at your wedding, but I give it now. You've proven yourself worthy of my daughter, not by your wealth or status, but by how you've treated her.
as an equal, as a partner, as someone capable of her own choices. Relief flooded Owen's features. Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. One condition, Jonathan added. You make damn sure she writes to me regularly. I may have accepted her choice to stay in the territories, but I'll be damned if I lose contact with my only daughter. You have my word, Owen promised. And sir, you're welcome here any time. This may not be much, but it's home. You're home too, if you ever want it. The two men shook hands again, this time with real warmth, and when they came back inside, Amelia took one look at their faces and burst into tears of relief. Happy tears, she assured them quickly. Just hormones and happiness. Father, you approve? I do, Jonathan said, pulling her into another embrace, though I reserve the right to judge harshly if he ever makes you unhappy. Fair enough, Owen agreed with a smile. Jonathan stayed for 3 weeks, long enough to help Owen repair the barn roof and clear new land for next year's planting. He charmed Maggie with his Boston manners, while also proving he could work as hard as any man half his age. He visited Amelia's school and expressed genuine admiration for what she'd built. And most importantly, he and Owen developed a mutual respect that gradually transformed into actual friendship. On the first day of September, 2 weeks after Jonathan's arrival, Amelia woke before dawn with the unmistakable sensation that the baby was coming. She roused Owen quietly, not wanting to alarm the household until she was certain. It's time, she whispered. Owen, it's time. He was on his feet instantly, equal parts excited and terrified. What do I do? Should I get Maggie? Should I ride for the doctor? Breathe first, Amelia said with a calmness she didn't quite feel. Then yes, get Maggie. The doctor too, but this could take hours. First babies usually do. It took 12 hours as it turned out. 12 hours of intense labor that tested Amelia's strength in ways the stagecoach attack never had. Maggie coached her through it with no-nonsense encouragement while the doctor monitored progress. Owen held her hand, let her squeeze until his bones creaked, and whispered encouragement that kept her going when she wanted to give up. Finally, as the sun began to set, painting the room in golden light eerily similar to the dawn of Amelia's wedding day, a baby's cry split the air, strong and healthy and absolutely perfect. It's a girl, the doctor announced, placing the squalling infant on Amelia's chest. Congratulations. Amelia looked down at her daughter, and felt something fundamental shift in her understanding of love. She'd thought she knew what love meant, but this was different, bigger, all-consuming in its intensity. This tiny person, red-faced and furious at being born, was hers to protect and raise and love. She's beautiful, Owen whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Amelia, she's perfect. What will you name her? Maggie asked, tears streaming down her own weathered face. Amelia looked at Owen, and understanding passed between them without words. Catherine Emily, Amelia said. After Owen's first wife and the girl whose death drove him to save me. They should be remembered. They should be honored. Owen's eyes filled with tears, and he leaned down to kiss first his daughter's forehead, then Amelia's. Thank you, he whispered, for understanding, for honoring them. They made you who you are, Amelia replied. They're part of our story, part of what brought us here. Our daughters should carry their names forward. In the days that followed, the ranch became a revolving door of visitors. The Wilson family brought gifts and congratulations. Marshal Hartley stopped by to see the newest citizen of Promise Creek. Governor Stafford sent an official territorial certificate and a personal note congratulating them. And Jonathan Prescott held his granddaughter with the tenderness of a man who'd been given an unexpected gift in his later years. She has your mother's eyes, he told Amelia, rocking little Catherine. The same clarity, the same intelligence. She's going to be remarkable. She already is, Amelia said, watching her father with her daughter, and feeling a completeness she'd never known was possible. October brought the cooler temperatures that made the Arizona Territory almost pleasant. Amelia had recovered from the birth and was itching to return to teaching, though she'd decided to wait until January to reopen the school. For now, she was content with motherhood and the work of the ranch. One evening, as she nursed Catherine on the porch, while Owen repaired tack nearby, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey of the past year. 12 months ago, she'd been preparing to board a stagecoach in Tucson full of plans and expectations about her future as a teacher in San Francisco. Instead, she'd been kidnapped, sold, rescued, married, and become a mother. She'd killed men in self-defense, built a school, inspired a territorial program, and found love in the most unexpected place. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked, looking up from his work. "How nothing turned out the way I planned," Amelia said, "and how grateful I am for that." "No regrets, each qualm, not a single one." She looked down at Catherine, sleeping peacefully at her breast. "Well, maybe one small regret that I can't go back and tell that terrified woman on the auction block that everything's going to be all right. That the man bidding on her isn't another monster, but her salvation. That the worst day of her life is actually the doorway to the best days." Owen set aside his work and joined her on the porch, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sunset together. "She wouldn't have believed you anyway," he said gently. "Some things you have to live through to understand." "True." Amelia leaned into his warmth, feeling Catherine's weight in her arms and Owen's solid presence beside her. "Did I ever properly thank you for stepping out of that crowd when you didn't have to?" "About 1,000 times," Owen said with a smile. "But I'll never get tired of hearing it." "Thank you," Amelia said again, "for seeing me as worth saving, for teaching me to save myself, for loving me enough to let me be strong instead of keeping me weak." "Thank you for staying," Owen replied, "for choosing this life, this place me, for giving me a second chance at happiness when I thought that door was closed forever." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky. In the distance, a coyote called, and another answered. The desert was never truly quiet, never truly tame, but it was home now. Theirs earned through hardship and defended with courage. The following spring, when Catherine was 8 months old and beginning to pull herself up on furniture, Amelia reopened the school. She taught with Catherine in a basket beside her desk, the baby becoming as much a part of the classroom as the blackboard and books. The children adored her, taking turns entertaining her during lunch breaks, and Amelia found that motherhood and teaching complemented each other perfectly. She and Owen resumed the training program as well, traveling quarterly to different settlements throughout the territory. They became minor celebrities in certain circles. The couple who'd stopped the Harding gang, who represented the best of frontier resilience and community cooperation. But they never let the attention change who they were at their core. They remained ranchers, first committed to the land and the life they'd built together. By the time Catherine turned 2, Amelia was pregnant again. And then again 3 years later. Their family grew to include Catherine Thomas, and finally Sarah, 3 children who grew up knowing how to ride before they could properly walk, who learned to shoot as a matter of practical education, who understood that life was hard but could be good if you faced it with courage. Jonathan visited every
This
year,
story was
sometimes
posted
staying
on the
for
channel
months at a
West of
time,
Betrayal.
becoming as much
Please
a
do
fixture
not
of the ranch
repost
as
it
Maggie.
in any form.
He watched his grandchildren grow with undisguised delight, and more than once Amelia caught him and Owen working side by side with an easy companionship that warmed her heart. The school flourished, expanding to include nearly 30 students at its peak. Amelia hired an assistant teacher, a young woman from Promise Creek, who'd been one of her first students and had gone on to study at a teaching college in California before returning home. Together, they created a curriculum that balanced practical frontier education with classical learning, producing students who could discuss Shakespeare while also managing a ranch's accounts. The years passed with the accumulation of small moments that became a life. Birthdays celebrated with simple cakes and homemade gifts. Christmases spent with extended family of choice rather than blood. The day Catherine shot her first target and danced with pride. The afternoon Thomas brought home a stray dog and convinced them to keep it through sheer determination. The evening Sarah recited her first poem, words stumbling but heartfelt. Owen's hair began to show silver at the temples, and Amelia found lines around her eyes that spoke of laughter and sun. They were aging together, building a legacy that had nothing to do with money or status, and everything to do with contribution and love. On their 10th anniversary, Owen surprised Amelia with a gift that made her weep. He'd written to the territorial capital and arranged for the official establishment of Prescott School, naming the institution after her father in recognition of his support and love. "You've built something that will outlast us both," Owen told her as they stood before the newly hung sign. Generations of children will learn, here will grow strong, here will carry forward the lessons you've taught. That's immortality, Amelia. That's legacy. She thought about the woman she'd been standing on that auction block in terror and shame. She thought about how far she'd traveled, not in miles, but in transformation. She'd been sold and bleeding, looking down in shame, believing her life was over. Instead, it had just begun. Now standing beside the school that bore her father's name with her husband's arm around her waist and her children playing nearby, Amelia understood something profound. Freedom wasn't the absence of hardship. It was the choice to face hardship with courage. Love wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing partnership despite that fear. Strength wasn't never falling. It was rising every time you fell stronger for the breaking and rebuilding. Thank you, she told Owen one more time, her voice thick with emotion. For everything. For buying my freedom and then setting me free. For protecting me and then teaching me to protect myself. For loving me as a partner, not as property. Owen pulled her close, and after 10 years of marriage, his arms still felt like the safest place in the world. You were always mine to protect, he said, echoing those first words spoken so long ago. But Amelia, now you're mine to love. Today, tomorrow, and every day after that. And as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and promise, Amelia Zachariah, survivor teacher, mother, fighter, beloved wife, finally understood that her story wasn't about being saved. It was about learning to save herself, and then choosing freely and without reservation to build a life worth saving. The end.